for all the blessings of our wonderful country, which still include our right to recognize our divine Creator in public meetings. Thank you for Canton, Georgia, where imperfect as we are always striving to correct our imperfections. Thank you also, dear Lord, for this council. May we always listen and learn from each other and work together for the betterment of Canton and our citizens. In your name we pray. Amen.
I'd like to welcome our guests and visitors here tonight. And first time I'll entertain a motion to, we need to look at the minutes you have in your package from the May 1st council meeting. In your package, are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, I entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Have a motion, have a second. Second. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voted for the motion. At this point, I'll entertain a motion for consideration of approval of the agenda. Mr. Cummins?
Yes, I'd like to make suggest addition to the agenda.
Okay.
And I'd like it placed between C and D on the old business. And it's an action item on intergovernmental agreement relative to 2.35 acres adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant.
Did you say under old business?
Under old business. You know, become evident that it really is old business.
Okay. Intergovernmental agreement dealing with the wastewater treatment plant land.
It's between us and the state of Georgia relative to the 2.35 acres adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. Any other items?
Mr. Mayor, under item number 12, I'd like to add just a discussion point as to the procedure we will follow, or you, the committee for a selection committee for the new city manager, will follow with regard to the resumes that will be submitted 1 week from tomorrow by all the council members. If you could just give us kind of a sketch on what's going to happen, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. That's under item 11, right? Council managers.
I think it's under 12.
12 is mayor's report.
Oh, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. Yeah, that's last week's, I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyway, it's under council introduced items. Any other changes or additions? All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Have a second? Second. Have a motion and a second. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voted for the motion. Okay. Now we are entering our public input period. We have 3 individuals signed up to speak tonight. Andy Potts.
Mayor, Council, I moved to Great Sky 11 years ago with my family. Our street, Wooded Mountain Trail, had the original construction surface on it at this time, as many of the houses remained unbuilt. As the real estate bubble burst around 2006, 2007, our street and the developer went to waste. The city, during this time, failed to maintain the proper bonds that the city is required to maintain for these streets. In 2006, a plat was filed with the Cherokee County court system, right here. If anybody, I have 7 copies if you guys would like one. Was filed with Cherokee County Court Street, showing our street as a public road, not a private street. It is signed by then Mayor Cecil Pruitt and stamped and entered into the court systems. This is the most recent document that has been filed with regards to our streets. So, the first question I ask is, why is the city trying to make a public road private? The city seems bent on doing anything but maintaining our street. The city wants my property tax dollars The city wants my water, the city wants my trash, but the city doesn't want to maintain or take any responsibility for the 1,800 feet leading up to my driveway. As of today, the street has the same original surface it had 11 years ago. The road has become an imminent danger to both the residents, city employees that come to check water meters, fire safety hazard. Anybody who comes on our road is in danger. If you legally think our road is private, please give us back to the county so we can have reduced taxes, reduced water fees, reduced garbage fees, and more. Now, Mr. Cummins, you seem to be the most vocal opponent of our street, and you clearly have convinced others, such as Mr. Rust and Mr. Huffman, that our street is private. When you ran for city council, this is directly from your website, you stated over 700 city residents are on private streets. The majority of these residents want the city to assume responsibility for these streets because they purchased their homes thinking they were getting all the city services for the city tax dollars they pay. And then you made a pledge. You said, my pledge, I will move for incorporation of all private streets into the city that were approved by the city at time of construction, if the residents desire such incorporation. I asked Mr. Cummins, why has your opinion changed? Are there a whole lot of ifs and buts with your pledge? Was this pledge given as a future council member or as an employee of the city? Who do you represent, Mr. Cummins? Do you represent the city of Canton or the citizens of Canton? Do you not see a conflict with your recent discouragement of Billy Peppers for city manager and then subsequently throwing your name in the hat afterwards? Mr. Cummins, you cannot serve two masters. And by putting your name in running for city manager, I'm here to ask for your immediate resignation from the city council. Thank you.
Next on the list, Mr. Jim Wyndham.
Mr. Mayor, Council, fellow citizens, Mr. Potts, nicely spoken. You covered a number of things that I wanted to. The first thing on my agenda was the fact that Mr. Cummins has decided that he's eminently qualified, I assume, to become city manager after 4 scant months of serving in a part-time position. I, for one, agree with Mr. Potts. If that's something that you entertain, you should resign and run for the position. Next, I had on there to talk about your campaign pledge. I understand what you're going to say about your campaign pledge. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. You're going to hide behind the fact that you said the streets were private. We maintain that they're not. There's a simple way out of this, folks. There's a real simple way out. If we want to figure out whether these streets are private or whether they're public or not, all we have to do is go to the courts and ask. Ask a judge to determine whether these are private or public. It's very simple. We may be able to do it in a declaratory judgment, or it may take something a little more complicated, but it's certainly not going to involve a lawsuit, which, and I hope the Tribune and the Ledger are here, because just before this meeting, Mr. Huffman, Councilman Huffman, excuse me, encouraged me to file suit against the city. He said he was sick of hearing from me. I worked on his campaign, but he's sick of hearing from me. Well, you know what? I'm sick of a lot of things too. I'm sick of driving up and down Wooded Mountain Trail and seeing the condition it's in. I'm sick of seeing the collaboration between these two. He's not coming over to your position on the fire department for nothing. He wants you to move into his position on the streets, and then he's going to turn and stab you in the back just like he has everybody else. Next. Apparently, Mr. Cumming, you think that there's a lot of rubes in Cherokee, that we can't see through this charade. Well, we can. And fortunately, because of that transparency, we're not in a place like Washington, D.C., where the mainstream media happens to be in the politician's pocket. We have organs of record, such as the Tribune and the Ledger. We've got social media. We've got other things. We can organize and see through you. To kick Mr. Pepper to the curb for your own personal gain is really just something else. If you think in 4 months that you can learn what all it takes to be about a city manager, maybe you should go to a 2-week astronomy course and head the manned mission to Mars. I'm sure that's within your capability as well. Next, I think it's fraud, as a matter of fact, to try to take private street or public streets and move them into the private domain. Fortunately, we've got a developer who's not going to stand still for that. And Mr. Huffman, the developer's got deeper pockets than the citizens to this town. And believe me, Gibraltar's not going to sit by while you try to pass the buck, literally, to them and to us. And seconding Mr. Potts's suggestion, again, I think you should resign if you want to run for city manager. Do us all a favor. Thanks.
The next person is Chrissy Gibson.
I just wanted to say I'm here for the dog park, dog questions. and we can-
Okay, good. We're gonna
Good
get to
evening.
that later on. I don't think there'll be any questions on it, but we will get to that later.
Okay.
On the agenda there. Thank you. All right. Under the next item is consent agenda. I will read each of these, and if there is an item on the consent agenda that you would like to have pulled off the consent agenda for further discussion, just let me know and we'll do that. Item A, approval to terminate Canton Paul Park leash dog park management agreement. B, approval to award and execute 2014 Lamig Street repair contract to Allied Paving Contractors, which we talked about at the last meeting at the work session. Approval of audio intersection request to allow sidewalk tables and seating, and this is would be consistent with the plan that was provided to us at the work session. D, approval of imposition of a technology fee, which is an add-on to fines. Item E, approval of nomination of Deborah Fincher to the Cherokee County Library Board of Trustees. And F, approval of nomination of Glenn Bliss to the City Zoning Board of Appeals. All right, does anyone want any of those removed for further discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. All members voted for the motion. Under old business, the action on zoning ordinance amendment section 8-8-C-62.05 Central Business District, General Commercial, and amending Appendix A, zoning use chart by adding a new conditional use of automotive paint and body shop. This is the one we talked about at a couple of different meetings, I think. We had it at one point, and then the advertising, I think, and that was re-advertised. And this is the auto and paint body shop that had been operating for some time down off of Railroad Street, I believe. And it turns out that the zoning was at least two different zonings there, ERC and CBD, I believe. The actual business itself is in the CBD zoning designation district. The question is, I guess, whether or not we want to add that to as a conditional use to CBD. So I'll open that up for any discussion or motions.
Mr. Mayor, my understanding that part of the ERC, that everything was conditional, and I think we were all in agreement that this would be okay because the next time, anything in that area would be conditional. I have an issue as part of the CBD that would open it up and make an automotive paint and body shop permissible throughout the central business district. I'm not in support of that throughout the central business district, and I have an issue with that. So,
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have a question, and this just to Mr. Dyer. If this were approved in that particular area, does that mean that this particular usage could be anywhere within the central business district?
Right, there are two steps could be required for this business to be legally constituted. This step just makes it possible to do it. Anybody would still have to come back for the actual conditional use permit. So first you have to add it as a possible conditional use, and then an owner would have to come and ask for permission. So in the future, they'd have to come and ask, and if it was a location you didn't approve of, you'd say no. And if it was a location you approved of, you'd say yes.
So
So it's adding it to the list of possible conditional uses.
But how do you seriously deny someone in CBD who wants an auto paint and body shop there, and if you permit it in one location, it seems to me like you almost set a precedence there unless there are extremely different circumstances.
Well, I think there would be. This is basically an industrial area. Whether it should be zoned central business district would be the question. But you could say, well, that's down there in a building that's basically an industrial building. But we're not gonna allow it over here on Riverstone. We're not gonna allow it. So there would be ways you could do it. I mean, you could flesh out where you would allow it. You could have rules for the conditional use, which are not being proposed at this point, but you could go ahead and put some objective standards in it. Or you can say, no, we don't want it anywhere in CBD.
Should we not, and I know this is an issue we want to bring to an end, but with what Mr. Dyer's saying, should we not go ahead and investigate, put some additional verbiage into what's proposed so that it does become a little bit more difficult to open a place where we don't want it?
Ken, what kind of time frame are we on this one?
So entirely up to city council,
Okay,
that
we've got time
business
to do
is
that.
there. Mr. Mayor, council members, there are already, review and approval criteria in place for conditional use approval within the zoning ordinance.
The general sort of.
Yes, they're general.
Now, I was talking about more specific, that we would allow it under these circumstances, whatever those are.
Can we suggest Mr. Dyer do that?
Sure. Sure, Mr. Grant.
and I guess the other issue I have with this, because I think we've been more than accommodating in looking at this issue and trying to make this work for this business, but we also have a business here that's been totally disregarded our zoning ordinances, and to go and to make additional exceptions. Again, I know it doesn't set precedents for other businesses, but we are making it easier for future businesses and removing some barriers. But again, I would not be in support of this at this time, especially without any additional procedures in place.
And I understand that it's been operating for about a year now. Mr. Russ?
Well, I think Hookie's suggestion that Mr. Dyer help us create some circumstances in the future which would allow it, or what we would restrict in the future, is hard to predict what the circumstances might be. There's a lot of variables that enter into it, and how are you gonna predict all the variables? So we pretty much know in general what we don't want, but when someone comes forward, I don't think anybody's gonna try to put an auto paint body shop on Main Street. They're gonna put it in an industrial area because it just doesn't make any sense. So I think maybe allowing this, and then we certainly have the restriction in the future to prevent somebody from going elsewhere.
It seems to me, though, that maybe you weaken your position by having a auto paint and body shop allowed even under conditional use in central business district zoning. someone else comes in from central business district zoning anywhere else. It seems like you sort of weaken your position anyway. I mean,
Wasn't it previously zoned where this would have been allowed, or not? Was it never
No.
previously zoned
no,
different?
it could have been allowed as a conditional use, right?
I don't think it's ever been allowed as a conditional
Under
use.
ERC, it wasn't under ERC
No,
either?
because there were no
Oh, okay.
conditional uses. The,
No,
I think the question would be whether it should be industrial zoned or not. And that's really what you're talking about. Not, this
Because-
may not be the best way to do it, it was just the most efficient way to allow this business, which is how this all started. I'm trying to figure out a way to allow
The
this.
other business down there, industrial?
Yeah.
Well, they're all light industrial, would be what, the better way to describe it, but, and I think, isn't some of the other property on Railroad Street industrially zoned?
No,
It's all CBD?
It's ERC.
it's either Edward River Corridor or a Central Business District, General Commercial or Urban Core.
Right.
Prior to that, some of it was light industrial.
That's what I was thinking,
Well,
there
there
was
used to be a
a-
cotton mill down there, so yeah.
Pretty much
There
had to
goes,
be,
right,
yeah.
yeah.
If we did refuse this zoning change, how much time would they have to move?
Whatever time, I guess, we allowed.
I mean, you can give them 6 months or a year to move, I don't know. I mean, they kinda created their own problem. I mean,
Oh,
really.
there's no
It's
doubt.
not, it's not
No doubt.
our,
I
it's
think
not our
that's
fault.
part of it.
It's
They
not
did.
our fault. So, it doesn't feel like a business-friendly waiver. It isn't very business-friendly for somebody to come in here and just put up a business that they're not allowed to put up.
And quite honestly, that type of business would, unless it's located in an industrial park or in a heavy industrial area of some sort, probably not gonna fit in a lot of places inside, the city core anyway.
As
You
a
don't see much
future,
of that.
as a future use for that whole area, will this inhibit our ability to bring other businesses in that area?
Well, that's a good question too, because, you know, earlier when we were talking about the discussion, the Unified Development Code, Mr. Grant mentioned that, basically, he'd kinda like to see that a planned mixed use area down there. And I'm not sure that planned mixed use would include that type of business, particularly if you're looking at something like a shopping, restaurants and stuff like that, and, you know, in there, and retail. Somehow or another, it's just hard to imagine that in with that type of zoning, but,
I'm cautious of setting precedent.
okay. Anyone else?
Could I ask the city manager what he thinks?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Glenn, what do you think?
Well, number one, it already exists there. Number two, we have the mechanics of refusing anywhere within the central business district another auto body paint shop by saying it's inconsistent with that particular location. I also agree with the mayor that if you do go ahead and establish it there, there is sort of the opening of the door, the crack in that door, which could be an argument for allowing it in other places within the central business district. You go either way. It is an existing business.
The question is that there's a auto repair shop just right down the street, probably less than 300 yards, well, where the crow flies. But it's across the street, and it's in another zone, but it's still, they're very close. I'm kind of like Ms. McGrew, don't want to set a precedent, but here we got auto repair just right down the street.
Are you talking about the one on 140,
No, it's,
Hickory Flat Road?
that's where Cherokee Street comes down, up there to, 5.
Oh, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, it was a service station.
It was a service station, and now it's auto repair.
I'm sure, well, yeah, I would think they would have been, as part of the business as a service station, there'd been a certain amount of auto repair there anyway. That would have been permitted some time back, so service stations require what kind of zoning? Ken?
General commercial, the spot, Mr. Mayor, that you're talking about, Mr. Huffman, has referenced, is a legal non-conforming use of that property.
Okay. So it was there before the zoning and all that went into
As a
that.
service station, but there's no, it's 100% auto, they don't pump any gas.
It's, when the zoning was adopted in 1998, the automotive repair was in that location at that point in time, and it's a legal non-conforming automotive repair since 1998.
That's fine.
Could we fine them and leave them there for 24 months? And then, that it could never be used again for that purpose, and they're the only one we're gonna allow in there?
I don't know that we have to try to force somebody out immediately, even if that's the decision. I mean, I think a reasonable period of time and probably very reasonable, would be appropriate if that's what we decide to do here. But I've just got a little problem with just changing the ordinance. Somebody came in, or someone came in, whether it was the owner that misled the tenant or the tenant knew what was going on, I have no idea. But they came in and in violation of our zoning ordinance, set up, operated for a while until finally, I think someone, I think that, how long had it been there before we even knew it?
I'm not exactly sure, Mr. Mayor, how long they've been there before we discovered the business.
Okay, it'd been a while, then, so someone told them they had to come in for a business license, right?
They were informed that they needed to either rezone the property or relocate.
Okay. And, so they came in violation there, and then, as much as we would like to have, or as much as I'd like to have them, because I, hate to see them do that, but we gotta think in terms of the long, the big picture, I think. And I think that, that's just not the place I particularly want to see developed in that way. And the precedence is what bothers me too, the precedence of the weakened position we might be in if someone else comes in just on the outskirts or just outside downtown and kind of want to do the same thing.
I know this is not part of the motion, but it feels like this thing's gonna get defeated, so what do we do with them?
I would say that, maybe we, give 6 months or something. Is that not 6 months, or even 12 months? I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I think the fact that we don't set a precedence is more important than how long we give them to get out.
Well, let's vote on the motion.
Well, we ain't got a motion yet, actually. We should have had, we don't. We'll go ahead and do that.
Right.
I'd make a motion that we do not add, the addition of the automotive paint and body shop to the, zoning ordinance in the central business.
We have a motion to deny, we have a second. Second. All right, now, any other discussion?
We can set the time for move out, we can do that later.
So if we vote in the affirmative for this, we're voting to deny.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anyone else have any comments? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. Thank you. Okay, action on payment of Love's property common area fees. Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I have an invoice for the common area fees in the amount of $7,835.75. And I would like someone to make a motion either for the interim city manager to pay this invoice or to not pay it, rather than just have it sit.
I move a motion is paid.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
got, I'm sorry, go ahead, you got something else?
Further discussion, now that we
Sure.
have a motion.
Mhm.
I am in favor of paying it because our two objections to not paying it were that, A, it bound future councils by our paying it. And the second objection to paying it is that it's incurring a long-term debt. And I think both of those objections really aren't applicable for the simple reason that we have paid last year $5,303.48, if our record here is correct. And so another council or another group had approved to pay it, and we are now here voting whether to pay the next amount. So they didn't bind us one way or the other as to our decision on this. So there's no binding, in my opinion, of future councils. And therefore, since future councils can decide the invoice for next year, we're not really carrying any debt forward. So in that situation, I'm also in favor of paying it.
Anyone else, Mr. Russ?
I think there was some concern when this was first brought up, that by voting for this, we were gonna be measured for orange suits to go to jail. This is, we, in voting in the affirmative for this, will not be breaking the law.
No,
I think there was some concern about that.
I don't think you're going to prison for that.
No, but I mean, there was some concern that we in fact were breaking the
I
law.
think it is a violation of state law.
If we vote in the affirmative to pay that, we
Right.
think so.
I mean, it's not something where they're gonna pay this, it's not a criminal penalty, you know. But the Attorney General's opinions have been pretty clear about this, I think. Is that this does constitute an obligation on part of the city. And the agreement is, as I understand it, is that this is something that even though our one side might say, we're gonna do this each year, my guess is Technology Park Atlanta is probably going to say, no, this is permanent. You owe this every year, not just January through December, but you owe it every year. And I think that, and it does, now if we could have an agreement with the developer that they're providing landscaping and grass cutting and maintenance services for the city for a particular year that would be renewable at the end of that year, then I think voting each year would work, just like a capital lease, you know, that a capital lease, you may have a capital lease for 5 or 10 years or longer, and yet at the end of every year, you could walk away from it.
But here, if we vote to pay this year, the council next year can vote to not pay it.
Well, sure, but I mean, that's.
So we're not obligating the next council to do anything. So how are we breaking the law? We're not creating.
Because we have an agreement with those.
Well, yeah, but that was the previous council that created the agreement.
No. Oh,
Somebody
previous.
created the obligation to make the payments annually.
Oh, you won't send me to jail.
Gene knows the
I
closest
mean-
he's gonna get is that orange tie. You're not, he's clean.
I just think that, you know, the council can do what they want. I just like to make sure that it's reflected in the minutes that I would be strongly opposed to doing that, because I do believe it binds future councils. You know, $7,000 a year may not sound like a lot, but it's sort of the principle of it, and that it is a debt as far as the definition of debt goes for the city, which we are not allowed to carry beyond the end of the year. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, aren't we then already bound by having made upon payment? If that argument holds true, are we not already bound by having made a payment in a prior year?
I don't think so. I think you may, if you make one mistake, do you think you ought to just keep doing it over and over and over again? Which is sort of what we do sometimes, you know. Ms. Critter?
You said you believe it goes against state law. What does our attorney say?
He doesn't want to go to jail either.
I mean, you judge it by the agreement, because it's actually a contract under the law, the covenants are. And in my opinion, it's an obligation to pay. I considered it, whether you could look at it as an annual maintenance, and it's kind of hard to cram it into that. I mean, the agreement obligates the city to pay every year, which I think is a debt, by definition,
Okay, but you said that they were obligated to pay
by contract.
by contract. Do we have a contract?
Well, the covenants are judged like a contract. The problem is the state doesn't pay, the county does pay. You know, they're under the same covenant, so it's just all over the place. And I look at it the reverse, which is, can they force us to pay? And I think they cannot force us to pay.
Mr. Grant?
A couple of questions, and so my goal is not to try to get out of paying debts that we owe, but at one, we discussed this a couple of times, and at one point, we were going to talk to TPA and try to get a list of services that, again, if it is a contract, where are the contracts and where are the list of services that, so, all I've seen so far is an invoice and, you know, amount due. So I didn't know if we talked to them, and then the second question was, has anyone met with TPA just to discuss this with them? Because I know Chattahoochee Tech, I've been told, doesn't pay these fees, and has anyone talked to them to see if there's any, you know, compromise we can make with them, or the situation that we're in, and see if there's, you know, if they're willing to work with us, or waive these fees in any form, or reduce them?
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
In response, we did ask them for expenses. What they provided was only a budget of what they spent the money on. The total amount of money that they budgeted was $104,290, and it's for landscape maintenance along the Bluffs Parkway, plants and flowers, maintenance and repair. Well, I didn't have anything maintenance, some office, legal and miscellaneous expense, management fees, street lights, utilities, insurance. It's the typical association type fee, expenses that they're incurring, and what they are doing is assessing us what is, I guess, included our contractual portion based upon the acreage that we own as a city along the bluffs. Now, there are two, it gets a little more complicated because there are really two parcels of land, one of which is wholly owned by the city, and the other which is part of the reservoir that's owned 25% by the city and 75% by Cobb County Marietta Water Authority, and they're paying their 75%, but we're not paying 25%, and so it gets a little bit complicated when you look at the total. But they have provided a list of what they spend the money on.
They're paying that 75% to us though, right?
Yeah.
So,
And has anyone spoken with TPA to?
I don't know, I had Mr. Dyer look into it. I don't know if you spoke to him or.
I just traded emails.
Would it be worth talking to them? See if there's-
Well, because one thing you could do is, we could be released from the covenants and enter into an actual contract.
that would be my suggestion,
An
that we do
annual
that.
contract.
That way, on an annual basis, you could then vote, I think, to continue or discontinue if you didn't want those services provided on behalf of the city.
I mean,
But in
that'd be
most-
my preference, if we're voting on a contract, actually vote and, you know, agree to a contract and pay for what we're contracted.
So it sounds like a mission for a city manager to me.
Sounds like a city attorney issue, because there's another issue if we don't pay it called the taking, is there not?
There is some risk that we would be deemed to have condemned a property interest and end up having to pay some lump sum of money.
So,
Could they take the property back from us? Could they
No,
take-
the actual covenant, we essentially, in my opinion, took. I mean, they had a right to expect some money. Now, who could make that claim and whether anybody can make it, I don't know, I hadn't thought it through, but there is some risk, right?
but if we're looking for a contractual change, I think it rests with him, right, with the legal end of
Could you
it.
put something together for our consideration by the June meeting?
Well, I want to contact them first to see if they have any interest, because we got to negotiate it with them.
Well, I think when you tell them that, the Constitution of the state of Georgia won't allow us to do that. I mean, and if, you know, we'd be happy to do it now and vote on it on an annual basis, when they send the bill, and, you know, I can't imagine not voting for it if they're providing us a service. You know, because, you know, the road looked pretty nice up through there,
But, Mr. Mayor, and I was looking for it on my phone here, and I guess it goes too far back, but I did take the liberty of looking and asking, do we have similar, dealings with other vendors that would resemble this? We got about 20 of them.
yeah, ain't like, well,
That's what I said, I was trying to look for them here, and just.
you're talking about like the Arts Council, the Chamber of Commerce?
No, it was more, Ms. Stanton, you might have, no, it wasn't you, excuse me, who put that together? It was Mr. Ingram that, I asked of that. Do you recall, Nathan?
There are quite a few of those items you're mentioning, Mr. Huffman, that were involved dues and fees for like renewal, services for software providers, maintenance agreements and things, and
You can send those copy machines back anytime you want to, even if you got a 3-year
Well,
contract.
that's one of them. So,
Yeah.
but what about the others?
Well, I would assume most of them you could, unless there's special
Yeah.
provision in the law which exempts them.
Presumably, they all have an annual ability to get out, which is what would make it legal.
Most software maintenance do have an ability to get out.
Right.
Of course, you're sort of hanging yourself because all of your financial service or financial accounting is dependent on a lot of this software, so you automatically pay it.
Mr. Russ?
Bobby, do we have another month? I mean, are we in any jeopardy if we wait another month?
Been several months already, I
To my knowledge, we haven't heard anything.
But, you know, it sounds like what you're trying to suggest, though, is that we would actually retain the obligation but change the terms of the way we pay it to a contractual obligation as opposed to the original contract, different contract.
Well, I think the idea would be, I mean, the mayor described it, is you'd have a contract that's annual.
Right.
That would
I mean,
automatic.
Renews
That still means we're gonna pay it.
Right.
Still means we're gonna pay them, we're just gonna pay them in terms that are more compatible with the state law, in your opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That sounds reasonable if we got a month. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not time, it's just that I have an open invoice and I think we need to address.
We're gonna address it, we're gonna pay it, we just wanna pay it the right way.
Right.
That's
I
good.
agree with that, okay.
Sounds good, so we table this, or what do we do with it? Postpone. I make a motion, we postpone it.
Okay. Any postpone is indefinitely?
No, 30 days, till the
Till
next.
the voting session?
Well, until Bobby gets back to us, because we can't vote on it for a month anyway.
Okay, okay, indefinitely.
No.
Okay. Next, we need.
We don't even need to vote.
We don't think we need to vote on postpone it.
No.
Let's see, the next item. Action on wastewater treatment plant change order.
Okay. That's me.
Yes, sir.
At the last voting session, we approved a change order in the amount of $352,171.20 for the Buy American clause that was pushed on us because of a change by the EPA in January of this year, the 17th of January to be exact. There had been a drop ball in the original submission of the DER documents to the EPD. The EPD had followed up in October of last year asking for an addendum to be submitted. It was never submitted, and therefore the EPD was continually waiting, and when we went through the entire process and it came to the loan agreement, we found that we didn't even have an approved DDR. Because the federal government changed it, we went ahead and approved the amount of money we were then required to do
a Buy American clause, and we approved that change order. Now, it must be that a lot of people out there had the same problem, or a lot of municipalities or organizations that are going through similar, and the EPA reversed its ruling on requiring approved plans and changed it to any plan submitted after January 17th would have to have the Buy American clause. This let us out of that particular requirement, and so I am motioning that we cancel this change order.
Second.
Who made the motion? You did?
I did.
Oh, you made the motion, okay, motion and second. Any other discussion?
Mr. Canton,
Yes.
in a discussion you and I had, there was talk that you did not want to cancel that?
No, we do want to cancel it now because the change order we want to cancel. Just the change order.
Oh, okay, I follow you.
Okay. And the reason is, it's no longer required because the EPA, between the time that we approved it and now, has changed the rules as to who is required to use Buy American steel. And we're not required because we had submitted our plans before January 17th, but prior to this change order, it was approved plans on January 17th.
So, are you asking that we rescind the
Rescind
vote?
this.
Now, the question is, when we voted before, didn't we have, two things in one the last time, or did we
No,
vote,
I had
we voted
two
on that
separate.
completely separately?
Yes, we did, and I'm gonna address that
Okay.
in here.
Okay. All right, the question is, to
Rescind.
rescind the, vote regarding the, change order for the $352,000.
So moved.
Well, it was moved, but.
Yeah, whatever, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. Okay, the intergovernmental agreement with the, regarding the wastewater treatment plant land.
Mr. Mayor, in April of 2009, the whole process of acquiring 2.35 acres from the state adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant went all the way through to a certain point, and then it stopped. It never got finalized. And in going through the QA/QC we did on the wastewater treatment plant, we were notified that we didn't basically have a completed agreement for the acquiring of this 2.35 acres from the state, and in contacting the state, they want a new agreement, which is basically the same agreement, signed, re-signed. We've got all the documents that substantiates it from April 2009, including the governor's signature on a resolution, and we just need to re-sign the document and process it.
Do we need an action, need a vote to re-sign? We already approved it.
Yeah,
Well-
I think the state wants a current approval. I
Current
think the motion would be to reaffirm it.
So, motion to reaffirm, and, let me explain what that does. It exchanges 2.35 acres for us. It's up by the armory. We are required in exchange for those 2.35 acres to do two things. Number one, to pave the parking area of the armory in exchange for it. And number two, to give up our easement rights on a current access point into the wastewater treatment plant. This would mean that we would have an additional expenditure of paving that no one thought of or considered for both the new access road into the wastewater treatment plant and for the parking lot of the armory in exchange of this 2.35
acres. The acreage is extremely important because without it, we're gonna be severely limited in our ability to do any future expansions of that plant in a cost-effective manner. So, well, between the repaving and the access could be anywhere from $200,000 to probably $300,000, $400,000 possibly. Don't know the exact amount. This all came up.
Seems a little high, but, I can tell you, it does on that. And let me back up on that a little bit, just from my poor memory that I have. When this was accomplished, and I seem very, to recall that we did get a confirmation from the state that this deal had been done, that it was completed. And that, our discussion with them was that, yeah, we would agree to pave their parking lot if they would give us this acreage and all that, you know. But they didn't even want that paved at that time. They wanted it to get in worse condition before we went and just resurface. That's all we were doing. We weren't building the parking lot or anything like that. It was just a coating of asphalt on their parking area. But the reason there was no movement to actually do the paving at that time was that they weren't in any hurry either. So we assumed that we would be hearing from them when they needed it done and wanted it done, and you know, and they had an agreement for us to do it, and we would honor that agreement. But anyway, that's just pretty much what I remember. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, there's nothing in the contract as to time or delays or anything. The contract does state that the state's obligation is to convey the property, or to convey the property is contingent upon the city's completion of the repair site to the satisfaction of the Adjutant General of DOD. Such satisfaction is in the sole discretion of the Adjutant General of DOD on the repair site in accordance with those specifications set forth by the Adjutant General of the DOD. Nothing about time other than they would determine whether we or not we had satisfactorily completed it.
The only question I have is, $400,000 sounds an awful lot for 2 acres.
It probably is. It may be less. I have no idea at this point in time how much it's gonna cost. It gets into the next item on the agenda as to whether we're gonna be expanding the plant. Do we include this as part of the project, or is this a separate project later, and we're going to be possibly utilizing the land that we don't have an agreement to be conveyed? I would think we wouldn't want to do that.
Mr. Grant?
If there's not a time on this agreement, however, if I understand you correctly, we could do it whenever we need to expand correctly and sort of put that cost off.
Well, not really, because as you know, we're going into expansion of the plant. If we expand the plant within the confines of the current, we're gonna be cramming everything in, and we're gonna make the future expansion much more costly and much more complex. If we have this land available now, we can go through a redesign process and utilize that land, making our current project design simpler and more straightforward. I mean, you can do it the way you say, but it's pay me now or pay me later, and the later pay may be much higher.
Well, if that's the case, then it's in, these 2 acres fall into the new plant, or the redesigned plant.
They would fall in now. We'd have them available now and could utilize them if it was more economically or simpler
in the process of the design, no.
Are there any cost savings by doing it, using that property versus not using it now, so to offset some of the costs we might incur at paving?
I think the process the design of the current design could be made a lot simpler. And yes, the construction costs, in my opinion, would be less. But again, we don't know until you do that design process.
Mr. Russ?
I have several questions, one of which is, do we really have a choice, Glenn, in terms of, its proximity to the current plant is why we wanted it in the first place. Do we really have a choice on this piece of land?
No, I mean, at some point in time, I mean, if we don't do this now and we go back 2 years from now and ask the state to do it, they could turn around and say, well, we're not interested anymore.
My second question is, do we have the money?
Well, that
You
comes,
agree it's a foreign- that's your next point.
I'm gonna bring that up and address how I think we can pay for it.
There's only one thing about this whole thing that bothers me a little bit. It's not black and white, it's very gray. You gotta do this to the satisfaction of the adjutant general. So how do you determine? You go out and get a bid. You have to present the bid to the adjutant,
No,
the
it's
adjutant general of the United States Army? I mean,
No,
it's-
the D, I don't know who did,
DOD,
but I
yeah.
assume it's of the.
Georgia.
Georgia
You
National
can go
Guard.
to present the design to him, say, this is what we're gonna do. He says, no, I
Not
don't
the
like it.
design, it's not the design, it's the completion of the work to the satisfaction.
That's even worse, because you
Well,
have all the
that's-
money invested, and then he says, I don't like it, I want it 2 inches thicker, I don't know.
Well, I think somewhere in here it specifies the specifics of how thick it has to be. I'm not sure, I think it was 1.5 inches, but.
That's pretty typical, and let me say this, if unless they've expanded their parking lot in recent years, and it won't even be anywhere near that amount.
Okay, I mean, as long as he doesn't say, I wanna be able to drive a tank over there, I don't.
No,
It won't be anywhere near that amount of money.
no, it could be
I
as
can
low
almost
as
guarantee
100,
that.
it's 150,000, but don't forget, we gotta do an access way, a new access street as part of the deal.
But my thought is this, y'all are saying that maybe the Army might not want to do it then. The way things are going with the military, that place might not even exist.
Who knows? But do you wanna take the risk that you don't have the land for expansion? Right now, just to give you just a quick way, we're processing 3.3 million gallons. That's about our capacity at its current strength level, although we're permitted to do 4 million gallons a day. We have pre-sold as of June, and this was an issue that I brought out in June of 2012. We had pre-sold at that time 650,000 gallons. Add 3.3 to add 650,000. We have sold the capacity of the plant. When we get through with our current project on the waste treatment plant, our current project is only to address the consent order because we were not meeting the requirements of the EPD of the state of Georgia. We will be able to do 4 million gallons a day. We're not increasing any capacity. We are going to have to, in the next 2 years to 3 years, begin planning to expand that plant even further. Where is it going, how are we going to expand it, how easy, how cheaply will that be? If those 2.35 acres, it's going to be a lot simpler, a lot less costly when we hit that point. And if we should be looking at making it as simple during this project as possible, in my opinion.
Aren't we averaging about 2.1 or 2.2 million gallons per day?
3.3 is the last thing that I heard.
Not average, surely.
Well,
We're not
I
averaging
don't know,
3.3,
Dave, what's
are we?
our,
3.3 is coming into the plant.
On the average?
Yes, but.
Man, that changed last year, that's gone up 50%.
No, but on discharging, it's about 2.5. But we gotta process the 3.3 that.
Where's the rest of that going?
A lot of recycle flows.
But we're taking in more than we're putting out.
Yes.
Something's gonna give one of these days. It's got to. I mean, we're only discharging on the average 2.1,
2.5.
2.5.
some of it's a recycle process, but you're, you know, and the strength is also greater, is that not
true?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I understand the premise of, future expansion and we would need this land for that. I know, Mr. Cummings, you mentioned that we were talking about the, cost additions next. I guess the concern I have is voting on something before we kind of know how we're gonna pay for it. And I know there are some
Well-
other issues, on the agenda too that may involve costs here, so I'm just trying to have the big picture before we.
Well, the big picture is, let's go back. We just eliminated a change order that we approved monies relative to our GFA loan. We're now coming up with another expense that was totally unknown at the time that we did the change order. The proposal that I am going to make is that we leave the loan addition that we've already been approved for, and has only cost the city, or would only cost the city $4,000. If it's unused, it can be returned to it. That's actually the next item on the agenda for you to vote, and this would then be included as part of the project, the repaving and the access road.
How much contingency did we have originally before that?
I wanna say 750,000.
No, it's about 650.
650?
So
Something around there.
we have 650,000 contingency, since we're not allowed to pay that.
Well, I'm sure that,
Have we allocated any of the 650 yet?
well,
And then we're gonna get down to another item on here and probably be talking about some additional design costs.
right.
So that's the one we need to be talking about, I think, because that's gonna be a
Well,
big ticket item.
I think we need to reaffirm what we've already had a prior council do, signed by the governor, a resolution by the governor, and all they're doing is saying, we didn't send the documents in, and whose desk they laid on, I have no idea, in April of 2009. And the only thing we need to do is reaffirm that what was agreed on in 2009 and move forward on the property. Now, you can go as to whether or not you wanna pave it this week or next week or 5 years from now at another time, at another point in time.
I would agree with that.
So that's just reaffirming the agreement that doesn't.
That's just reaffirming everything, and I've got all the signatures on the original agreement, the governor's resolution. I mean, this has all been done. I mean, even Mr. Hobgood's signature's on here.
Maybe if they wait long enough, they'll close down the armory, who knows?
Well,
No, but I think the action on, no, I mean, that's, the military's closing a lot of stuff down. But I mean, the action to reaffirm this is just a separate item.
it's a separate item.
Yeah.
We have a motion, did you make a motion to do that?
I think we motioned in second.
Second, okay, any other discussions on that? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voted for the motion, okay. Next item is action on wastewater treatment plant loan addition.
Did you know we did a loan addition with GEPA relative to the requirement on Buy American for $400,000? That was approved. The cost of that loan at closing is $4,000 to the city. That's not a recurring, or that is not a recoupable cost, so that is an actual cost. The $400,000 is issued at the time of need. If it's not needed, we don't have to use it. We don't pay anything other than that $4,000. We have a paving issue that we may want to decide to do. To my mind, it would be, or opinion, it would be valid to keep this loan in place because of the minimal cost, and it overcomes or provides us a further cushion on any future risk related to problems in building not expanding, but building and taking care of the consent order on the waste treatment plant. It's pretty cheap insurance, $4,000.
I have just two questions. Where is the $400,000 now, and where is the
Well, it's with
$4,000?
JIFA.
$4,000, are we committed to anything so far?
No,
We haven't
that
spent any.
4,000 is upon closing. I mean, we could turn around and say we don't want that money and
And it doesn't cost us anything?
doesn't cost us anything.
We have not closed the GFA loan?
I don't believe this has been closed, has it, Nathan? I don't believe it.
It's been executed, yes.
It has? With the 400,000 in it?
No, sir, we're wanting to increase it by 400,000.
The increase is not done.
The increase hasn't been done. But it's been approved or voted on, and I'm just saying, keep it as a risk against, I think there's some design issues
Well,
with our
if we,
plant, and that,
if we wanted to keep it, Glenn, we wouldn't really have to vote then, would we? We'd just use it for a different purpose, or we still have to put it to a vote?
well, I've got it on here, you don't really have to vote, you'd have to vote
To knock it out.
to knock it out, which you could do, but I think, in all fairness, it has to be mentioned here that that loan was based on the original Buy American,
It's
but
not.
at the time we did the Buy American, we didn't know about the
Well,
land and.
What Buy American is paving an armory for
Yeah, well,
American
that's-
troops, so that's a good thing.
It's a.
No, but I mean, it's another use for the same facility, so
It's another use of the same facility, and it's an insurance, to me, it's a cheap insurance at $4,000, because you're not gonna incur any cost on that 400,000 if you don't need it.
when is the rate right now is 1.4%?
I believe that's correct.
If we waited 6 months or a year, would that rate possibly change?
2.31.
It would go, how do you know when it will
That's
change?
the current rate right now, 2.31, because we're gonna address it.
I thought it went up,
Oh, it's up.
since we started this whole process.
Oh, absolutely, it's up.
So we're now talking that.
You're talking you're talking that.
But the 4,000 is still the same, it's just that the
That's all
rate of
the
the
same.
loan is just
The
changed.
1.4 interest rate is still the same. The 4,000 is only the closing cost, should we take
You
advantage.
just said something incorrect, I think you said the 1.4 was still in place, that's not right.
On this 400,000, it's a 1.4.
Oh, it is?
Yes, if we turn
But
it
if
down
we,
now
I
and
think
need
if
it
we
later,
wait
we'd
to
have.
take it, it could go up, it will
That's
go up.
correct, it will go up, and right now it'd be 2.31.
And the 1.4 doesn't change for the life of the loan,
Doesn't change for the life of the loan.
bingo.
The only concern I have is we have a fairly large contingency anyway of $600 and something thousand, $650,000, and, which actually is considered, obviously the bid on the plant was what, 7.4, 7, whatever, in order for us to borrow the $8 million. And, I know, cheap money is cheap money, but, it extends the debt that we have. It has-
We don't use it.
Well, yeah, but we're obligated there if we bring.
But we only lose 4,000.
We only
We don't
lose
use it.
$4,000.
It's a,
Well, I know we could,
it's a cheap, it's a
you look
cheap
at, why don't we
lock-in.
just borrow, why don't we borrow another 10 million, just hang on to it then?
No, but
In case
we.
we ever need it.
But, Gene, I think we approved for a Buy America program, $400,000 for a $352,000
I understand
potential
that.
debt. For the exact same facility, we now think we might have upwards of $400,000.
Well, it may not be that much, but.
But I think preserving that contingency is important. We haven't even dug into the ground yet. So I think when you start digging in the ground, you're gonna have expenses and it could eat up that 650 pretty quick.
It could.
So I don't think
It's not-
using that for this armory thing is my
You know,
thing.
the council do whatever they want to do on this one, certainly, but it's not gonna hurt my feelings one way or the other. Except, I just don't like to, borrow money that you really don't have a place for at that time, that you may not need.
If you were-
When you have
if-
$650,000.
If you're buying a $400,000 house and you could lock in $4,000 loan for a period of time, you might, for $4,000, you might do that. When you know it's going to 2.1 if you wait too long, I would do that.
Mr. Mayor,
Why not?
I wouldn't borrow more than I needed.
Mr. Mayor, you're not really borrowing more, it's a line of credit. It's a way to look at it as a line of credit for 400,000, should you need it. Until you need it, it's not borrowed.
Okay, Mr. Ingram, when we're totaling up our debt, do we not include that $8 million for the reservoir that we borrowed?
Oh, we do, we have the whole.
So that's exactly the same thing, isn't it?
No, it isn't.
No.
We,
'Cause we
right
have the
now,
8 million.
we're just simply asking, we're pre-approved, if you will, for $8 million on this project. We're just simply saying, if the need arises, we may need to, can we increase that to 8.4?
Why wouldn't we do more? I mean, where do we get the $1 million
If the project
above
called for it,
our?
I think we could do it.
Yeah, where do we get the need for $1 million above our current, bid on the plant? Where's it go? I mean, if it's 300 or 150 for paving the parking lot, that's one thing, but where's the other 700,000 or 800,000 to go? My guess is we're talking about a lot of design changes in this thing that's gonna be phenomenal.
And the city has already accrued about $400,000 worth of design. Construction management costs are included at $8 million.
Yeah.
But anyway, we gotta,
To me, it's a line of credit, it's a very cheap line of credit, it's, can be used, and you'll see when we get into the next item where there are gonna be design changes, there should be design changes, there are gonna be, no matter whether you go with the original design or you go with the, proposed revised design, there are gonna be design changes.
And I guess, again, kind of going to, voting on this and going to the next item, not kind of knowing what kind of money we're talking
You're not
about.
talking about any more money, you're talking about the 400,000 in this particular thing.
And we haven't even, started construction, so.
That's right, and there's probably $200,000 worth of change orders already.
but I still don't, I haven't seen anything that spelled what the anticipated needs were in the various categories. How much are we really gonna have in design changes?
Don't know yet.
Well, you do know some of them, don't you?
My estimates, I do know some, but I think we need to get into the specifics of the options of what we do with the design. And then the council can decide how they want to
Sure,
proceed with
sure.
the design.
Sure.
And right now, to me, this is just saying whether you wanna keep the loan as a line of credit, as an insurance policy against possible issues and design issues that could arise. If you never use it, doesn't cost you anything but that $4,000.
Do we have a motion and a second for the 400?
We don't
And
have
we
any
can-
motion.
now,
Yeah,
we
we're
can-
just-
can-
we're just talking.
can we have that money for the next 20 years held in escrow for us?
We don't get the money until.
I know, but can we get that at 1.4% 20 years from now? If we don't need it right now, but we take it down, how long do we have that can we just keep it there if we don't use it?
No, we don't have it. How can we keep it?
No, you got the commitment for it. You got a commitment for
You
it.
mean, do we have the line of credit for 20 years?
Yeah, how long does that last?
I don't know. When do we have to finalize that, Nathan?
To finalize the whole project, a couple of years, 2 years. 2 years
Oh, it's 2
thereabout.
years.
So after 2 years, the loan will be closed, and if we borrowed $7.5 million, that will be amortized over 20 years, or 8.4.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, do we have any motion? Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve a $400,000 increase in the,
Just keep it.
but then we would keep it and use it for this purpose, so we,
Use it for which purpose now?
well, for the, have it available to use it for the armory requirement,
Waste
a land.
Okay.
Correct.
Waste treatment.
Waste treatment. So we don't have to do anything, either, right?
Just like.
We just,
You wanna-
you wanna reaffirm, what we wanna do is
Okay, I'll
reaffirm.
make a motion, we reaffirm that 400,000.
Okay, we have a second. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, all members vote. Item E, discussion and possible action regarding wastewater treatment plant QA/QC.
I'd like to make the motion that we accept the
recommendations of the QA/QC report.
I'll second it.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Yes, Susan, could you bring up the first slide so we could take a look at it? Oh, Holly, you can sort of dim the light. Whoops, the screen's going up, not going wrong direction.
Oh, I didn't notice it was down already.
That was it. The first option relative to the waste treatment plan is a little background on this. We had a engineering firm design the compliance with the consent order, and option one would be to build it as designed. The pros of doing that, there is theoretically no additional design cost because we'd be proceeding along the original design. There'd be no additional EPD approvals required, and we'd have an immediate start. The cons, based on the QA/QC and discussions, would be there are certain areas where it's impractical to build as is without multiple change orders. The future expansion capability is complex and will be more expensive than necessary. It is a complicated operational process. There's a high risk of permit violations during construction. There are several features that do not meet the manufacturer's recommendations or requirements, and there are some structural risks involved with the current builder's design. Next slide, please. The second option, redesign the project, go back to square one. Better design due to increased knowledge of limitations and constraints. Future capacity could be included in the design. The cons is that future capacity will have a high present cost, but will be less expensive than in the future. In other words, that $8 million isn't gonna expand the plant. If we were to expand it, it would be significantly more than that $8 million. We would have to accommodate the Buy American provision because we're now after January 17th. We have an increased interest rate on the GFL loan. It's 1.4% now versus 2.31. There would be a cost for our contract cancellation with our current construction company. We know construction costs are not going down, they will increase, and the project would be delayed a minimum of 12 to 15 months. Next slide, please, Susan. Option 3 is revise the current design during construction. Probably the pros are the most efficient method to complete the project. It will result in a simplified design, which should result in a reduced construction costs. There'll be improved operations during the construction, which minimizes potential permit violations. There'll be a reduced construction change orders, and the future expansion is simplified, thereby minimizing future construction costs. The cons, there'll be additional design costs. We estimate, Mr. Tavian and I estimate somewhere it's probably around $75,000 will be known there.
but hopefully we'll be able to save it on the construction costs. There's an unknown total cost impact of, at the present time, but the project will remain within budget. Whatever we've got and agreed to borrow, there's a high probability and belief that we will stay within budget. The other con is we need to get DDR, submit DDR amendments and revised plans to EPD for approval. We have talked to both GFA and EPD, and they are verbally on board with the direction that we would do, that we would be proposing to head. Now, in all fairness, one of the factors that we can do is to even simplify it more. We can take advantage of the 2.35 acres, which simplifies it even more. The basic process of how we treat waste is unchanged. It will be simplified. And that's the three options. The motion I made was to take option 3. That's been seconded, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Susan.
Any discussion? Well, I want to reflect back a little bit on this project somewhat. We have paid, I guess, more than $400,000 to an engineering firm to design this plant. And my feeling is that these, we should not bail off of the horse that we're halfway through the race on. I mean, by doing that, if we change and make a lot of changes, design changes by another firm, then we've got some, I think it's going to be considerably more cost, and not only that, we're going to be paying double for some things. We've already paid for the plant to be designed, and what we had, of course, is that during that design, some city staff, of course, was not happy with certain aspects of the design. They yet they couldn't get the design firm to believe that that was the best way to go. And I think that we had engaged them to be as efficient and cost effective in their design as they possibly could be. So of course, staff decided that they would look, and the council agreed to do a quality control, quality assurance study with this firm that, of course, had been discussing this with our staff for some period of time anyway, okay? And lo and behold, when we got the study back from the QA/QC, guess what? Most of it was pretty much, as I recall, about what our staff had mentioned. And so they come back with the same thing. If we allow a change of engineers at this stage, we will essentially be paying, as I indicated, for portions of that plant double, looks to me like. The quality assurance and quality control report outlines these items that were mentioned, but this report was also sent back to the original design engineering firm, who responded. And hopefully every one of you have read their responses back, which was pretty much that there is no evidence that their design will not work. There's no evidence that it won't work. And to me, as opposed to paying a new firm money to redesign aspects of it up front, I would prefer to hold their feet to the fire of the original design firm, that if something goes wrong, that they have messed up along the way, or if it doesn't work, then they fix it at their cost, not at the city's cost. Instead, the city will be paying a new design firm to go back and do some of these changes and paying them more money. And if $75,000 was all it was in the design cost, I'd say, you know, that's interesting, and that's very small. I cannot believe that you can get the kind of design changes and problems corrected or whatever that they had indicated for that kind of money. My guess is it's going to be considerably more. You know, I think, you know, if you're having surgery, I don't think you'd want to change doctors in the middle of the surgery just because a nurse said that didn't like the way he was working, like the way he was doing the surgery. I mean, somehow or another, it's just sort of, you know, we're changing horses in the middle of the stream. I think it's going to be more expensive, and even the response back from the original design company said that, you know, it will delay the project and it will cost more money. But it's just money we're talking about, that's all, just money. Yes, sir.
I like your analogy of the surgery. The only problem is we haven't started the surgery. And I got 5 doctors in the room, and I'll name the 5 doctors. I've got 2 engineering firms. I've got the company that we contract to operate the wastewater treatment plant. I've got our in-house engineer. And in addition to that, I have the people that are building it. And we're going into surgery, and these 4 doctors or 5 doctors, one says, I think we ought to operate this way, and I've been your original doctor, and the 4 other doctors says, I think the other way is better. I think I would choose the 4 doctors method. And that's one thing. The second thing, we know there's going to be changes. Even the design firm has admitted that there are problems with the original design. They have admitted in their report that they did not have time to do something, so they had planned to do it during the construction phase, of which they had no contract to even be involved in. The engineering firm that would do the design changes, as I have motioned, is the engineering firm that is going to manage this project. They will be on site all the time. So we've got a very close proximity to this redesign process. The end product will be much simpler. The end product will not deviate from manufacturer's specifications, and I can be specific. The screen manufacturer requires a minimum water depth of 1 foot at the screens at all times. The design we got from the original engineering firm provides for a depth of 6 inches. Possible overflows, don't know. But it doesn't meet the manufacturer. The manufacturer also says on the screening that all screening should be accessible. There's one that there's a 20-foot drop on part of the screening. Yes, a cantilever can be built, but that's a change order that we're gonna have to have. That's a redesign. Now, if you are suggesting, and I don't have a problem with, that the original design firm will pick up the costs for all of the changes that might be necessary during the construction process, that's a whole different picture. Or are we just inferring or implying that they're only going to pick up the redesign costs? I don't know. My gut feeling, I'm not an engineer, my gut feeling when I have 4 people that are experts and they go through and they argue to me that method B is better than method A, and I only have 1 supporting method A, I tend to have a better feeling of going in that direction. So,
Mr. Mayor?
yes, sir.
I do think the people that we've been doing business with, designing this, they're in the audience now. If it was permissible, I'd like to have them come and speak for themselves as well as maybe some questions. I might have a question too myself. If Mr. Toxler or whoever would like to.
Mr. Russ, did you, excuse me, hold on a minute, if you will,
Before
we'll
we
do that.
bring Mr. Jocker up, I'd like to say one thing.
Sure.
Option 3 is what you're suggesting, and that's what the motion has been seconded.
That is correct. We,
To me, it boils down to a simple thing, it's accountability. In one hand, we've got someone suggesting changes and really not accountable for the changes that they're gonna make. That would be made by the engineering firm. On the other hand, you've got someone suggesting the changes and managing the process and accountable for those changes that they're
they
making.
have accepted.
That's the fundamental difference here.
But we're not gonna have a QA, QC study on their plans, are we?
That's a good idea.
I mean, where does it end? I mean, really, I mean, we had on the original design, we had a QA, QC analysis, and yet we're gonna allow other design to come in, and we're not gonna have a QA, QC design. We paid $30,000 already for that study. Just
Yes,
a thought.
but, you know, when I look at that Hickory Log Dam, I think about 30,000 was nothing, you know.
I agree.
So what are you gonna spend it now or spend it later and spend it 10 times, 20 times the amount? The faulty design on that wastewater treatment plant's gonna cost us forever. I want upfront the best possible. If I'm having brain surgery, I'm
Sure,
gonna listen,
I-
I'm gonna listen to those 4 doctors before I listen to the one guy who's whistling in the wind. You know, I'd rather have the best brains fixing my brain. if
Well,
that's what it comes
let's
to.
ask Mr. Toxler up, because he's not whistling in the wind.
But just all fairness, when they get through, I think we ought to bring up the representative from ESI.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think I missed 2 seconds of Mr. Cummings' motion. Does anybody remember?
Mr. Russ, second.
Mr. Strong, you get it?
Yeah, I'd like to have Steve Hewitt join me if we could.
You could do that.
Okay. Okay. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
But let me just say a couple of things that I think we need to talk about up front, which is a lot of the driver on this project, and I think we discussed this at length over the last year and a half or so, was the extremely tight site that we were given to work with. And early on, we discussed 2 pieces of property that were potentially available to us. One was the 1 acre that was actually owned by, who was that, was that the National Guard property? It was the 1 acre that was actually acquired. Then there was 2.3 acres that we asked about, and we were told there'd been discussions, but that property wasn't available, and it probably wasn't going to be made available in time to do this work. So with that, we took what we had, and that's the basis for our design. A lot of the aspects of which are deemed to be complicated and fairly complex, and they're really not that complicated or complex. Yes, if we'd had the 2.3 acres to start with, there would have been some things we could have certainly done it a different way. And I guess it's the question of, okay, you have to make your judgment of, do you want to spend money to use that property right now? I mean, we have laid this project out, and I'm gonna let Steve hit that just a little bit, or maybe we can answer some questions. So we've laid it out so it can be expanded. We don't think it's that desperately complicated to do down the road. We've got a place for the big pieces of equipment, which is the biological portions of the plant. The headworks of the plant are designed to be very easily expandable the way they're located. So when we're talking about a faulty design, we certainly disagree with that. There's a couple of things that I think need to be done a little bit differently, looking at it. You know, we don't disagree with all the recommendations that the QA/QC people had. I hope you've had a chance to read the letter that we sent back in response. But with that, gonna say anything, Steve, or take questions?
Just that question.
So let's
One of the questions I had was, and I may have heard it incorrectly, so if I did just say so, is that, y'all now recognize some of the things that you may want to do that were not in the original plans that were submitted. Would that be something that, you would put in a, change order and then we would end up having to pay for?
There were a couple of things in the VE report that, I think could be done a little differently. One of the things that came up, very late in the design was that there were an issue with the, ultraviolet disinfection, and that, it was flowing over, or it wasn't flowing over, but it was, running up too high and getting the valves on the UV lights wet. And that's a problem. And we were asked if we would look into that to find some type of quick fix for it. Unfortunately, this was late in the design.
So we end up
And we
having to
didn't
pay
have
for that?
time,
That's
we
not-
didn't have time to look into that as closely as we could have. And what I put in that report was that if, and I didn't say this in my response, was that if we had been the construction manager, that would have been something we would have looked into more thoroughly. And it is something that should be looked into. But again, that wasn't.
I wanna know who is responsible bearing the cost of the change?
The change would, the change would go to the city. It would have, if we had known about it earlier, it would have been a part of the design to begin with. The other one was that, and Mr. Cummins mentioned it, was the access to the screen, and there should have been a cantilevered slab, on the side of that screen to take care of that. It's a minor thing. It's really a very minor thing.
Let me, if I might, let me go to 1.51 in the report. In the QAQC report, and I'll read it, hydraulically, the current headwork structure will pass the peak hydraulic flow rate. However, there is concern that the influent box is a potential overflow point. The arrangement of the weir wall on the downside stream of the magnetic flow meter may cause solids to be deposited in the channel. A buildup of these solids may potentially block the flow through the meter and cause the influent box to overflow. That was the report. Your response was, review of the hydraulics of the influent box confirmed the capacity is far in excess of required flow. The accumulation of solids blocking a 24-inch pipe causing a spill is highly unlikely. During daily operations of the collection system, there will be a number of times when the pipe experiences flows in excess of 2.5 feet per second, or the velocity generally considered self-scouring for sewers. This velocity will keep the piping clean. I'll stop there. There is two different engineering opinions, and none of us up here can assess which one is correct. But going further, if I didn't accept the QA/QC that was performed, or in order to accept your explanation, or which explanation is probably right, I asked one question. Why is there a clean-out hatch right at this wall where they say solids will be deposited? Because they could accumulate at that weir wall. Is that not true?
There's a capability to have, you may get some large solids in there that.
That's right. So they were correct in their report, saying that solids could accumulate and that self-scouring is a possibility, but not necessarily sure. So we have built a hatch right there in which to be able to clean out that pipe. Is that true, or it's either true or not?
The hatch is there to have access to that area.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, is it likely that you're going to get the solids accumulating in there? I can show you practically every treatment plant in this area that has similar piping.
Why build a hatch if it's not gonna happen?
Well, The hatches, I mean, there's a lot of things in that treatment plant that hopefully won't have to be used over there for in case they do need to be used.
Okay. So it's
And it's
possible.
simply, I mean, it's good judgment, good engineering to do that.
Yeah, because it's a possibility.
Well, you know, the possibilities are endless. So, you know, it depends on how you want to look at it.
That was. Mr. Cummings, it's an extremely, in our judgment, it's an extremely low possibility. And we try to do the plant work that we do so you have access to places in the plant where you hope you never have to use it. But if you don't have a hatch and there's some problem in there, then the only thing you can do is get out the concrete saw and the jackhammer. So we put accesses to places that a lot of people don't. Just because sometimes things happen that you don't expect or low probability. What they call them, black swan events, kind of thing. Is that the terminology?
Anything, Ben?
Have you guys had a chance to the changes that you would make according to the report? Have you estimated, if you made the changes, what the design changes would be?
I think there were only two things that I was making any modification to. And the one is, apparently, they had contacted the structural engineer that did basically a fix on that, on one of those SPR basins. That work can be done a lot of different ways. And what we offered was that we would redesign that at no charge. What I expect on that is that there would be very little or no charge on change order to the contractor as well. The other one is that cantilevered slab on the screen, and that's about depending on how much you want to put in there, it can be as little as a yard of concrete or 5 yards of concrete if that's what you want to do.
That's right.
Well, I'm concerned here because I think your own words don't give me a whole lot of comfort here. The mayor was questioning the $30,000 QAQC report. And
No, I wasn't questioning that report at all. I wasn't questioning it.
Well, you said we spent it. You pointed out the fact that we had spent the money.
I was just saying we spent that money off of that.
Right.
I wasn't complaining about it.
Because Mr. Troxler was saying he thought there was some good things in it. So I'm questioning in a way, if we hadn't done the report, maybe some of these changes would not have come to the fore until we're into the construction process. And you said yourself now that you see some errors here that are gonna have to resolve themselves in change orders after the construction process begins. And you also said you didn't have time to do some things. Some of these things give me great pause because all these things are gonna cost the city money. And the only question is, do we pay now or do we pay later, and how much do we pay later? And the accountability, I come right back to the accountability. You're not gonna be accountable because you're gonna be out of the picture as the original designers, and the changes are gonna be somebody else's ultimate responsibility for making those changes and charging us.
Well, I've been right here and said from this podium that we know that on that site there'll be changes. I'm not sure I said it to this council because you have a plant there that's 60 years old. There's a lot of stuff buried in the ground. And when you start working on a plant that's this old, this many pipes, old utilities, some dead, some alive, when you start digging, I mean, it was not practical for us to dig up the whole site. We did what we could. We did some geotechnical work. But yes, there are going to be some changes. I think the changes that were talked about here, that Steve mentioned, the SBR structural and the cantilever, those are things that, well, the cantilever It's something that probably should have been in there to service the screen. We agree with that. But again, that's a very minor change. I mean, I think if there are items in there that should have been in there and in the bid regardless, I think that's something that you would have had to pay for if it had been in the original design. I think if there's things that cost the city money they shouldn't have to spend, I think that's our responsibility. If that is any clarification.
That's your responsibility, means you'd pay for them?
If there are things that shouldn't have had to, if they're costs that you wouldn't have had to bear anyway. For example, the cantilever around the screen, we're saying that should be there. Well, that should have been there. If that was in the original design, you would have had to pay for it via the contract. So when you put it in as a change order, it's basically the same money.
That's of course assuming that you didn't design it differently so that you didn't have a 20-foot drop to start with. You know, there's a lot of what is, but I don't have any further questions. I think we ought to bring ESI up.
Does anybody else have any questions here? Okay, thank you.
We bring up ESI, but
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I'm Scott Hennessy with Engineering Strategies.
you want to address some of the major issues that you found in the QA/QC, Scott?
Yes, sir. We were asked by the city of Canton to do a review of the design for the wastewater treatment plant. And in that review, we identified several issues, which I think y'all have seen the report. These are the major issues that are outlined in here. The first item that we had, significant issues, was there's a conflict with the proposed tertiary clarifier. There are existing electrical duct banks in the right adjacent to where the structure is to be built. It's pretty clear on the drawings that the manholes are right next to the structure. That structure is being built right on top of the duct banks, so that's going to be an immediate change order that the contractor is going to have to deal with. That structure is going to have to be moved. Second item was talked about SBR basin number 1. That structure, when it was originally built about 10 years ago, it was improperly designed, and there was a fix that was done. The current design calls for walls to be removed from that structure. We contacted the structural engineer that designed that structure and asked them if those walls could be removed, and they said that no, they cannot, because they were part of the structural fix. So we identified that as a problem. The next problem that we identified was the equalization basin. We believe that it's under design for what was presented as the design in the DDR. The original design for that SBR system was for an average daily flow of 3.33 MGD. This design is increasing that flow rate to 4 MGD. And as a result of that change, the volume of water that's being decanted during each decant cycle is being increased by 120,000 gallons per day, or per cycle. And there's nothing in the design required equalization flow is 5,500 gallons per minute. And based on that, the volume required for equalization is about 200,000 gallons. Typically, I design a safety factor in there. So if I was designing it, I would have said that you need a 240,000 gallon equalization basin. The current basin only holds about 180,000 gallons. So I believe that that is a critical flaw in the design. I didn't see any calculations from any information that was provided to us that indicated that that was looked at. And then there's potential problems downstream too, whether the downstream processes, the filters and the UV structure can handle that additional flow. According to the design, the original design of the UV system, this is designed for 5,500 gallons per minute, but there's obviously some sort of hydraulic problem with the UV structure. It can't, the banks get flooded when the flows are that high. So there's an issue there in that type of, with the design. Let's see. There's also an issue with, you know, in the equalization basin, there's the design calls to install a new wall around the EQ pumps. Believe there'll be problems during construction with that. The design calls for the existing reuse pump station to be used as a temporary equalization basin while the construction is taking place in the equalization basin. According to my calculations, that structure is not large enough to handle the decant flows, and it's going to overflow every time an SBR decants during the construction period. McKim & Creed said that the flow was, that the pumps were large enough, but according to the design documents, the pumps, or the design documents call for the pumps to be sized for 5,000 gallons per minute. It calls for 2 pumps to be provided. One is a duty pump and one's a standby pump, but the current decant rate during dry weather flow is 5,985 gallons per minute, and the decant rate during the wet weather flow is 8,000 gallons per minute. Because one of the SBRs is going to be out of service during construction, they're always going to be in the wet weather cycle, so they're always going to be decanting at 8,000 gallons per minute. And, you know, 5,000 gallon per minute pump isn't going to keep up with 8,000 gallons per minute coming in. So that's what's my concern, and that's why I pointed it out for the QA/QC review. As described before, the head by Mr. Cummins, the headworks, you know, it's designed to pass peak hour flow. Our only concern was with the head box, and it wasn't only the 20-inch line. There was concerns with the bypass line not being adequately sized also. I determined that the head loss through that pipe, if the peak flow was going through the bypass line, there'd be about 9.5 feet of head loss, and there's only about 1.5 feet of head available before the structure would overflow. So I pointed out that concern also. There were several minor issues regarding operation and maintenance that we found. Just the way the new influent pump station was constructed, there was very little access to the hatch for pumps for the operator to pull out pumps. Typically, you provide access to all sides of the access ladders that were located in locations that would be difficult to access. The issue with the screen was pointed out. The SBR basins, it's not a typical design, but the manufacturer of the SBR said that they would warranty it as it is designed, but they have said that they have never done anything like it before, so it's gonna be one of those first try things. So that's basically a summary of it.
Yeah, first of all, let me say that, you know, from my perspective, if you had been the original designer and the other firm had been the QA, QC group, my guess is they probably would have found some stuff as well in the original design too. But anyway, so it's not really, you know, I'm not looking at one side or the other than the fact that we did, you know, have a firm to take a look at it and do the design, and we paid quite a bit. Let me ask you this, Scott. How much would, if your firm does the design, what kind of cost do you think we're talking about in change orders?
Change orders?
Cost, what kind of money would we be paying your firm over the next duration, construction period of this?
I don't have that number. I can't say that number at this time.
Okay, so, I mean, you couldn't even guess, put a guess out there.
Yeah, I mean, I could guess, but.
I mean, I'm not signing a contract or anything here, you know.
I mean, engineering redesign fees might be between $100,000 and $200,000 if it was redesign fees.
Okay. Yes, sir.
When you started taking a look at the plans, was there any consideration of the 2 acres, 2+ acres that we're thinking about acquiring in order to help alleviate future problems? Was that had anything to do with your evaluation of some of the flaws you might have seen in the system?
The 2.3 acres didn't have anything to do with the QA/QC of the design plans, but when we were asked to look at recommendations, then the 2.3 acres came into play.
So to fix or repair or redesign, you would have to use the 2.3 acres or a portion of?
We assume that the 2.3 acres was available and is available, and our recommendations were based on using that 2.3 acres because we believe it's valuable to the future of the facility.
Then, if you didn't have access to that 2.3 acres, some of these recommendations might not be real or could not be done because of the fact that you don't have the space. In other words, Mr. Tantra's firm designed it as if they didn't have the 2.3 acres. Am I correct?
I think, and I did ask the question of them, and let me rephrase. I know where you're going.
Okay.
I asked the question relative to if they did not have the 2.35 acres available, could they eliminate the design problems they found within the same parameters as given to the original engineering firm? And you answered to me, yes. Isn't that correct?
Is that still correct?
Yes, I would have been in a different way, but I mean, that's just.
Yeah, we're not starting over, so, but the question is would we be looking at it differently had we not had the 2.3 acres? In other words, you're suggesting some fixes, or redesigns, is better said, but you're doing it with the point that we have the acreage.
If we did not, if you did not have the acreage, I I still think that you would need to expand your equalization basin to make the treatment plant function correctly, the way it's supposed to be designed. I would have probably just built an extra SBR instead of trying to, you know, expand the existing ones, but, you know, that's where you get into, they did it one way, I do it a different way.
Okay.
But I do think that you need the additional equalization basin. That's that. You need to fix the UV system so that it can handle the additional.
Okay. Pardon me, but your position at the firm, are you just the engineer, owner, partner?
I'm a partner.
Partner?
I'm a vice president.
Vice president. Mr. Cummings had mentioned to me about some of the things that y'all would take over and be responsible for. Mr. Cummings, could you?
Well,
I'd like to hear it coming from Mr. Turner, right?
No.
I'm Scott
Hennessy, excuse me, I apologize.
The question came up of accountability, and the statement made, of course, in the report, that you can read it, is by them providing the design changes, the firm will be able to take responsibility for the redesigned facility as compared to the existing situation where accountability is unclear. But I don't know if the last part of that sentence applies, but they do and will accept responsibility for the redesign or accountability for the redesigned facility according to the recommendations.
My question is the definition of responsibility.
For the design.
Right now, ESI has a contract with the city of Canton to perform construction management of the design. If that's all we have, then we will make sure that it is constructed as designed, and McKim & Creed would retain responsibility for that design. If we were asked to do redesign of the project, the responsibility would then fall on me as the design engineer. But in that, you know, I have to look at everything from front to end to make sure that, you know, I'm comfortable with everything. And then the responsibility would be my company's.
But you're not, still not sure about responsibility.
Mr. Rust, you had something.
Well, I think in fairness to both firms, if the 2.3 acres had been known to be available, they may have done things, both have done it differently. If you had been responsible for the original design, that would have certainly been different, and between McCree, would have been different also. But here, you basically had a $30,000 agreement to review an existing design which was confined to the space that we had at the time. So your project here with regard to this review was limited to the design as it stood. So I think, I'm trying to address something that Hookie said, because I don't think you can go past that for either of you with this design that's in question right now. For the future, both of you agree that that 2.35 acres is important to the future of this project. But as it stands today, we're only concerned about this. The thing that comes back to, for me at least, is the accountability. If we change with option 3, which has been second and is on the table right now, you're going to be responsible start to finish. Is that correct? I mean, if you accept the changes, do you understand what option 3 was? You were here?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Option 3 was that there would be a redesign of
incorporating all the possible change orders that are seen, at least today. We already know today there will be change orders. You're going to incorporate them before you start. right?
As many as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna still probably see some down the road, but we know you both agree there are changes that gotta be made right now.
If engineering strategies is redesigning anything, then we would have to accept.
Yeah, the difference for me is just that the accountability, start to finish, is yours versus their accountability ends when you start.
I think the question Mr. Huffman was asking particularly is that if you're allowed to make design changes in the plant and it's going to function, then you will be responsible for the entire plant and all the engineering that's gone into it. I would assume from that day forward, and they would have no more really responsibility involved in the other firm. Is that fair or is that not right?
Well, I mean, if there's something that's not touched that we didn't look at, say there's some part of this design that was not touched.
But don't you think that would get into, well, if you hadn't touched this part, then that part would be working great?
I think, Gene, but in fairness, the plant is 60 years old. If they're gonna be responsible for the whole plant, we'll tear it down and build a new one, and then they'll be responsible. They're gonna be responsible for the changes that are made to that plant, not the whole plant.
Well, but what, the changes may affect the operation of the whole plant. What happens if it doesn't work
If
at the
it-
end?
if
Who's
it-
responsible?
if it's because of the-
It's him, it's him, it's him.
Well,
That's what I got.
if it doesn't work, that's one,
I think he's next.
Bill, go ahead.
Well, let me start with saying I know absolutely nothing about designing or constructing wastewater treatment plants. However, I do, as a designer, I know if I was designing a logo and a client took it to another designer, they're gonna get two totally different approaches, and they're probably both valid. And I think, both firms here, I'm sure, are doing their due diligence and trying to do the best job possible for the city, and I appreciate that. I do though see, extreme consequences to start a plan and make changes to it, and we have a hybrid then of two different strategies and approaches, and accountability that's not quite clear on where does it start and where does it stop. And then my understanding on option 3 that was on the table, I believe Mr. Cummings said that the design fees, estimated design fees, are approximately $75,000.
That was the initial figure that I was given.
And Mr. Hennessy just said $100,000 to $200,000. And my concern, and we were talking earlier on the paving and the new easement, possibly $200,000 to $400,000, and we possibly $200,000 for design changes. We're possibly at $600,000. It's possibly our contingency.
Well,
in design, we haven't even started construction or.
One thing that hasn't been brought out is the plant is being extremely simplified, and there is a high possibility that we're gonna have credit change orders, is there not? I'm gonna let him answer that. Is there not that possibility that we're gonna have change orders to our benefit?
There is a possibility, yes.
Possibility.
Well,
Two possibilities.
I mean, if you're gonna simplify it, does it not bring us some value to simplify it?
Yes, good.
And that value's gotta be equated to dollars. If you're simplifying the process, or simplifying the way you do the process.
Yes.
Okay, I mean,
And two
to
other.
make it less concrete, there's gotta be a benefit to it, correct?
And two other questions, and maybe I wasn't clear about this when we authorized the QA study, but is it typical for the construction company to do that? Is that, or would you look for a third party?
Third party to the QA, what's probably typical, Bill, that we didn't do, is it's probably more typical, the design company and the construction management company would be one and the same, and you negotiate that at the front end. So now you don't get a difference between the management of the project and the design. With a different project management company, the way we split it into two pieces, for whatever reason was split into two pieces. What you have is
that you have that engineering firm managing the project, the construction company comes up and says, I got a problem here, we got a change order. Now, they have to assess whether or not that's a valid change order, and if you leave the original design firm in the process, that change order then has to go back to the original design firm, who's going to then argue, oh no, that's not a design problem, that's a construction problem. And you're gonna have a terrible, in my opinion, a terrible mixture there. So the ideal thing is that the project management company or the project management engineering company and the design engineering should be one and the same. In our case, it is not.
I can understand that makes sense. What I would maybe wonder about is, would the firm that did the quality control and quality assurance of another firm and then come to do the actual changes themselves? Now that, I don't know how common that is actually.
That might be a conflict too, I don't disagree. I mean, there's.
I don't know.
Again, I believe everyone's working in everyone's best interest here, but it just seems like we're in a predicament here that it's hard to say, well, did the plant they designed, is it not gonna work properly? I mean, I think we discussed the other day, like, they're both right, so.
Well, in certain cases.
In certain cases.
In certain cases, the way the language is written, they could be both right, but they're making the statement based on different assumptions. So you read the answer and you say, well, that's correct, and you read the other one, you say that's correct, but they did it based on different assumptions.
Anyone else?
Mr. Henson, has you ever been involved in a situation like this where? Nor have we.
I'd like to go back to an interesting point that you brought up. It was about credit change orders and that possibility because of some efficiencies with this plant, that there might be some credit change orders. Is it in the contract, or would it be contemplated that we would incentivize the contract manager to share in our credit?
That is the typical way of doing it, but since we don't have a decision made yet on how we're proceeding forward, we can't really negotiate that yet with the construction company.
Anyone else?
One other.
Yes.
McKinley Creed have already been paid for the design.
I assume, yes, correct.
That's correct.
They're saying, for the most part, if I heard them correctly, that they would assume that, no additional design fees for the things that they may possibly have overlooked. I'm trying to see their incentive. I mean, they've already been paid, so, they have a strong incentive to stick around and see their design through completion, or?
They have none, really.
But yet they're willing.
They got none.
To do that. We paid them a lot of money. We're looking at paying them a lot more design fees possibly. It's a very difficult situation.
Well, anybody that's ever seen a design project, been a part of it, change orders are really expensive. Because you don't see them coming, and there's no end to where the change orders come from. So the front end design is critical in terms of preventing change orders. You know a lot better what's coming. And if McCready's not involved with the costs of the other end, it's all going to be on the construction management company. What's the incentive for them to turn around and charge what they have to? They have none. They're going to treat us fairly, but there's no control there, really.
I don't understand what you're saying. Back up.
Well, the change orders are what they are, and it's not going to be the original design firm's responsibility for what those costs are at all. None. If we could proceed on a different option than 3.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
I don't think it's a question of whether we should proceed and take advantage of a redesign. The real question, because of the 2.35 acre, why close our eyes to that availability? No matter who does the design, let's ignore for a minute who does the redesign. To ignore that, we're gonna create a very complicated design which we know has flaws in it. I don't think there's any question or problems in it, and we can get into engineering differences. We're gonna create, if we ignore that 2.35 and don't do any redesign as we go on, we're gonna have a huge problem down the road. We should take advantage of that, no matter which engineering firm does it. Now the question becomes, in my mind, since none of us are engineers, is who are we, or you guys, all, gal, most comfortable with doing that redesign? I think that's really the question, in my opinion.
Do you think, when you sent that to, Mr. Trox's firm, would they, if they'd had that 2.3 acres, would they have designed it the same way they designed it now?
Probably not. And I would probably say that they wouldn't, because they would have had more space to do it in. But again, that's more reason why we don't want to build it the way it's designed.
Okay, I can understand that. But I'm trying to think, play fair, you might say.
But in evaluation of the design, that 2.35 acres wasn't considered in the evaluation of the design. In other words, they wouldn't, the proposal that they came up with took advantage of, or the proposed redesign took advantage of the 2.35 acres. But if they didn't have that, they still would have redesigned this differently within the confines of what McKinley Creek had.
But does that mean that Thompson's group wouldn't have done the same thing?
If they, well, no, they didn't design it differently within that confines. They designed it the way they designed it. I'm saying they ignored it in evaluating the design. They ignored the, but in looking at how they would propose moving forward, they took advantage of that.
Now, was that in their, scope of work to propose out how to, actually, make improvements, or were they just actually supposed to look in their scope of work at the,
They were to make
control?
recommendations.
Okay, so that was in the scope of work?
That was in the scope of work to make recommendations. In fact, it was them that brought to us our attention that we had the 2.35 acres. Somewhere in this city hall, that ball was dropped of getting it finalized with the state, somewhere it was. I don't know where, all I know is that we don't have, nobody knew it, and it was actually ESI that brought that to our attention.
Well, ESI was involved actually in getting that, working to get that, I believe, because I believe I dealt with Pedro on that, about trying to get that extra land sometime.
Maybe that was worth the 30,000 right there.
I
mean, seriously, I mean, we wouldn't even be talking about it if we hadn't had them a part of this. True?
I wouldn't complain about that, John.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
I think we ought to.
We have a motion and a second.
Engineering.
The only.
What is the motion?
The motion is to accept the recommendations of the QA, QC report.
Which means
They did the
do the redesign of the thing.
With the ESI doing it.
Right. Yes.
That's correct.
You know, it's just, I don't wanna repeat myself, but we have the, you know, we paid a big chunk of money out there to get this thing done. And while there are differences of opinion, obviously, there, you know, I don't know that there's any evidence there that the design won't work like it was designed. And we're gonna create additional cost, and we're gonna have additional, time involved in.
How much
It's obviously gonna take more time, but it's gonna be, if we did this, it would be almost kind of like a design build project where we would do the partial designs of changes and then the construction company could get started on things. So they wouldn't be waiting until the design was 100% complete.
So they could be on site, start something, or
Pretty
they
quick.
are on site.
Well, yeah, you already have a contract with the construction company and they have a notice to proceed, so.
One other question, did I understand that what you were saying is that ESI would be responsible for the changes that they did, but not for the entire design of the plant? So that,
If y'all asked ESI to do these changes.
right,
ESI would be taking responsibility.
for all the design.
Right, but we would have to, I'm just pointing out that we would have to look at everything that's been designed.
Well,
You
you didn't do that when you did the QA/QC? Wasn't that part of what that was? When you did the quality control on their design, wasn't that to look at all their design?
We did look at all, yes.
Okay.
sir, We looked at their design.
Okay, so what are you saying else you would have to do?
If we start making changes to something, we need to look at the whole thing to see what does it affect, upstream and downstream.
Right.
So, that's what I'm saying, if we go in and make redesigns, we're going to be looking at the entire project, and we'll be taking responsibility for the entire project. I can't just go in there and change one thing and not look at how that impacts the entire rest of the facility.
Well, that was my question. So by saying that, are you saying that's gonna mean it's gonna cost a lot more money, or, I mean?
But you had said what indicated you were looking at, you were talking about the capacity of the pumps, you know, 8 million gallons versus $5 million gallon pump. You know, you said you were looking at the process.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're saying, well, maybe you haven't looked at the whole process.
No, I'm saying that if we go in there and instead of building what was designed, we go in there and say, okay, we're gonna change this, we're gonna build this SBR basin, then I need to look at the whole design to make sure that it's gonna work.
Okay, if you implement all the changes that you were recommending, can you then say, that works, all the way through?
I
Right
guess
in the back.
That is what we would do.
I think, Glenn, you need to withdraw your question because you called the question and we keep talking, so. Want to withdraw the question?
I wasn't recognized with that.
Man, I think that,
I was talking actually when he said that.
I mean, just for clarity, you're saying that if you make a design change, that may create another design change, you would take responsibility for those design changes that you make. But if you make a design change that causes another design change, I mean, you would have to charge for that additional design change, correct?
I think it's getting more
But
complicated.
they're hearing you make an exception to taking responsibility, that's what they're hearing. And so can you explain what the exception to responsibility would be, or if there is not one? But that's what they're hearing, that you're hedging your responsibility.
No, I'm not hearing that at all, but go ahead.
Well, that's what
I'm hearing.
That's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing that, but go ahead.
If we were asked to make changes to this design, as soon as we start making changes to the design, we would accept responsibility for the design.
For the design part, but not some existing problem that exists now before construction, you wouldn't be responsible. That would be the only distinction, right? If there's something wrong with the plant that nobody touched, including you, you're not gonna take responsibility for that.
Well, it's parking like it's a sinkhole, I don't expect them to take
But you
responsibility.
gotta understand, there's gonna be these gaps, and the contract with you, that we're gonna do with ESI is gonna have to be very clear about this.
Yeah.
Cause this is what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
If you're saying, when we redesign it, we're now gonna take, basically substitute McKim Creed's responsibility, we're taking it on. Is that what you mean?
If we start redesigning, we're taking on the responsibility.
As the same responsibility they would have had for the whole design.
Right.
That's what I
They
thought you
have no
did.
more responsibility.
Here's the difference I see, is very simple. If you start building it, you're gonna manage the design of the build out to this thing right now. If you build it exactly like it is, and you get into the design and you start to say, wow, this isn't gonna work, change order has to come. The responsibility for the fault or whatever for that change order is 100% on the design company, if they will accept that responsibility, and you're just gonna build it the way it was designed with any change orders. The difference is, you're gonna design it so those change orders are minimized, perhaps reducing our total expenses, and accept responsibility for all the changes versus the other options which just lets you stand back and build it the way it is, make the change orders that have to be made, and you have no responsibility. Is that correct? You have responsibility for, obviously, for doing your job, but not for those.
Our job would be to make sure that the contractor builds the project as it's currently designed.
Even if that's faulty.
Even if that's faulty.
And you have no
But you would point
responsibility
out
for the fault.
anything you felt, you would point out specifically any problems that
And
y'all
those
saw
changes,
along the way.
those changes are not gonna be their responsibility.
No, it wouldn't be their responsibility, but if they were something that was done that shouldn't have been done in the design, I mean,
If
the other
the,
firm
if
would be
the,
paying
if
for
the
it.
change orders go over 400,000, you think they're gonna pay it up? Are we gonna hold them accountable for it? McKim agreed?
Well, it's already gone to 400,000.
No, but I mean, are they gonna pay us additional, pay it all back to us for the changes?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well,
This is
it's not a question, it's a statement. My question is to them, are they gonna pay us if we have to make changes that cost us $400,000?
No, because they don't think they're necessarily.
Well, they already said there's some changes that have to be made.
Well, the changes they're gonna make, they're gonna pay them themselves.
Go ahead.
They're gonna take care of them.
May I just say one thing?
Sure.
What we're gonna happen is that the construction company, this is reality. The construction company is gonna come and say, we can't build it that way. The project manager is gonna therefore have a change order in his hand, which he would have to present to McKim and Creed as it currently stands. McKim and Creed's gonna say, that's not a design error, that's a construction problem. And we're gonna be a month there fighting back and forth as to whose problem it is.
And you don't think you'll have that with another firm?
No, because he's got the whole thing. He's got the whole thing.
Even if the contractor decides that he's got a problem, he can't build it?
Then he's gotta fix the design.
Work it out.
He's right on site to fix it. So, I mean, no matter what, you're gonna have that problem. Now, the question is, do you want 3 parties involved, or 2 parties involved? One, who's his job is a construction management currently. He's sitting there and saying, construction company says we can't do this. Kim and Creed, here it is. Now, Kim and Creed says, well, that's a construction problem. And the construction company says, no, that's a design problem. And he's sitting in the middle and he's saying, I'm doing my job. Isn't that correct? In essence. So now you got the construction company and the design company at each other's, with him and the project management and the design, he's gotta fix it. One way or the other, he's gotta get it built.
I don't think this council's ready to make a vote.
Well, you got people on site, you're gonna have to decide one way or the other.
I think we are.
We do have a motion.
Second.
You gonna restate your motion?
Motion is to accept the recommendations of the QA and QC report as submitted to the city.
Okay, by accepting that, does that automatically hire another firm to do something?
It says right here,
Okay.
direct CSI to advance the design changes.
And that is with the assumption that if we accept this, the full responsibility for the plans, design, and the functioning, I'm assuming, of that plant will change hands.
One last thing, I wanna ask, and I'm not saying that we gotta do this, but we got a bunch of people up here asking questions that we all admit we don't know a whole lot about, and I'm just thinking that maybe we should have somebody else up here asking questions. I'm thinking about Mr. McTaven. That
maybe he
Fine,
should.
bring Mr. Atavia, I would think that's a great.
Is it?
He's our engineer that looks after us.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Hennis.
Hey, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Don't mess up.
Question?
No, I want him to ask some questions.
He doesn't have any questions.
To whoever he wants to ask him. I just want to hear, do you have questions about what we're doing, or do you have statements that you would like to make about what we're about to do?
In my opinion, I would go with the recommendation or the motion that's made.
You got any 1, 2, 3 is, I mean, are you?
Oh, option 3,
But I mean, are you 1, 2, 3 as far as the pros and cons?
Yeah. Yeah, option 3 as recommended in the QAQC report.
Did you hear anything in the conversations and us tonight that?
Oh, yeah, I've heard it all before.
You don't think he's gonna buck his balls here, do you?
I hope you would.
He knows that he can. And it has nothing to do, I am basing my opinion on input from others, not on my own, because I'm not an engineer.
He accepts the fact that he's not always right. So he can question that.
Tell me where it's wrong. Have I stated it the way that the four parties have basically explained it? I mean,
Do you understand the responsibility, the comments
Yeah.
of who? How would you interpret that?
I would interpret that as moving forward with ESI, that they would be responsible for the design.
What does responsible mean?
Responsible means liable. But that'd be what it is.
That's what I'm trying to get.
Liable,
They're
then we have a
they're
problem.
gonna put their stamp on a set of drawings that says, this will work.
Which one of those options will you sleep at night best with?
Best?
When during the construction process and after it's finished? I mean, because you're the guy that the call's gonna come to you when it doesn't work.
Now, in a perfect world, I would start from scratch, but option 3 is definitely the way to go.
That's quite the question I had since you brought that up. I was sitting here thinking the same thing. I know we already paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time, but now we have this additional acreage and other things. Would we potentially save money if we did start from scratch and design and start with the same design and build firm? Because I feel like we're possibly about to vote on something here, about to open it up to design changes. We have no idea of what they may be.
the problem is, the very first thing, assuming that the Buy American clause would be the same in the new, we get hit with 350,000 right there. Assuming the interest change is $800,000. So now we're at 1,150,000. We would have to cancel the contract with the current construction company. I don't know what those cancellation clauses. It could be $150,000 cancellation. I have no idea how much. The point is, if we do that option, which is the ideal option, there's no question, the cost could be well over $1 million. It may even hit $2 million, who knows?
And the other is the timing.
And the timing.
We already know we're gonna have another big bill coming down the road when this city keeps expanding, so.
Yeah, I think.
This is an interim.
I think you gotta go with option 3. The question is, do you go with option 3 and have a project management company that takes the change orders, or the design company coming forward and hoping that there's no change orders, and that design firm could be McKim-McCree, utilizing that 2.35 acres and simplifying the process, or it could be ESI. But I think you have to go with option 3, to tell you the truth. And I don't see what other option you have. The question is, do you want one firm doing both the redesign and the management, which is the normal and customary method, or do you want 2 firms?
It's just money, that's all.
We're trying to save as much as we can.
I'm trying to save as much as we can.
And no going in what we're gonna pay. And no going in what we're gonna pay. So,
Very, very expensive design for a plant that size, very expensive, but that's where we are.
You wanna do your question again? Nobody's talking right now.
I made a motion, I'm done.
Let's vote.
We have a motion and a second, okay? All those in favor of the motion?
Call, please.
Sandy first, ladies first.
Okay, sure.
You say yes?
Mr. Councilman this time.
Yes, thank you, that's
Yes,
great.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay. All members with the exception of Mr. Grant voting yes. Okay. Well, that's enough of that item. Let's go to another one now. Let's get into a serious one this time.
Suggestion, Mr. Mayor, is that we put these complicated ones first, because the other ones tend to go easy.
Well, this is our last, this is our, let's adjourn to the painted pig. This is our last meeting in this council chambers, is that right?
All right,
I hope so.
it is.
Okay.
Safety policy.
Safety policy, I make the motion, we adopt the safety policy that was discussed in the work session that you reviewed, and we answered in attachment 3, the questions about revision.
Second.
That's the motion to adopt it.
Have a motion and a second. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. Discussion on action on city employee YMCA membership agreement. Scott?
I make the motion that we accept the agreement with the YMCA that'll give our employees membership benefits.
Second.
Have motion second. Any other discussion or questions? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. Discussion declaration on private streets in Great Sky. I put that on there this time because it needs to stay alive until we reach some decision, okay? I have looked at the information and tried to, as much as I could find, and, you know, regardless of what the initial intent was, the evidence that I've seen is there's no conclusive evidence, at least to me, that says that these are any different than any other street within Great Sky. There are definitions of one-sided streets, private streets, and yet it distinguishes between those in the definition. Private streets, according to the definitions that were presented and submitted by the developer, I'm assuming it came with, it says private streets will typically be used in apartment, townhome, and cluster neighborhoods. I don't think either of these streets are in an apartment, townhome, or a cluster neighborhood. And so that to me, I mean, in my mind, I feel like that maybe they could have been very likely intended to be private streets, but the plans that were signed by the city, and when they were submitted and approved, it had no designation distinguishing those streets from any other street. And I just haven't seen anything yet that tells me that they're not, you know, that the city can hang its hat on, at least in my mind. Mr. Canton.
Yeah, first, at the beginning of this session, I got quoted on what my viewpoint was on private streets and what my commitment was, and I would like to bring attention to Mr. Potts, who made the comment that I made the commitment of bringing, or finding a way of bringing private streets into the city. And if he had been in attendance at the prior meetings, he will see that not only did I fulfill that commitment, but the city has adopted a policy which states the method in which private streets can be incorporated into the city as public streets. In fact, we have 2 subdivisions that have already done that. Pinnacle Place and Villas of Riverstone. So I take slight offense of being accused of not following through on a commitment. There is a policy. Now, as to these streets, I don't know whether they're private or whether they're public. I do know that the original master plan that was submitted has asked for private streets in Great Sky. And there are 4 streets that have been designated on the city record since day one as private streets. Again, I understand the plot and I understand the description. Whether they're private or public streets, that's a decision that this whole council makes. It's not a decision I make, that's why it's been brought forward. Those streets, even if they're declared public, there is no requirement other than us to put them on a list for maintenance at some future time. Whether that's next week or 5 years from now. Streets are addressed in the sequence of need. And there are many streets within the city that have greater need than maybe those particular streets. Now, even if those streets were declared by this council to be public, they were accepted as streets within the master plan without sidewalks, without curbs, and without any stormwater drains. In fact, it says one-sided streets typically will have no sidewalks or storm drains or curbs. So I'm just going through it. Now there may be a conflict between document A and document B, and that's the purpose of this council here, is to determine, I think, first, are they private or public streets? And if they determine that they're public streets, then they ought to determine the method in which they should be brought into the public, into the city maintenance program. And I mean,
Okay. All right. Anyone else? I want to make a comment. Yes, Mr. Russ?
Well, I think I've been up and driven down the Wooded Mountain Trail, and it's not the most desirable situation, but it's not as bad as I had expected it to be. But I think regardless of what we determine them to be, private or public streets, I don't think we can ever bring them up to the standards that the residents perhaps want us to. First of all, we can't widen them. We can't add curbs to both sides, and we can't add gutters. We can't add storm sewers. So there's some restrictions we would have even if we did decide to bring them in as city streets and maintain them on a schedule. There's a limitation. We can never make them more than what they are or more than what they were when the people bought them, bought the lots. So there's really severe limitations on what, I'm not sure we can ever fill the expectations of the individuals that are most vocal about the problem. We can satisfy some people maybe if the streets got resurfaced or got maintained over time, but I'm not sure we can ever do, we can't make the streets wider. You just can't do certain things, period. So I'm not sure eventually how much difference it's really gonna make.
Mr. Grant?
I mean, I basically agree with everything that everyone's saying and reviewing the documents and plots myself. Again, I agree that there's no distinguishing those streets as any other streets in Great Sky, which are public, and we did vote on a solution for helping maintaining those streets and going forward, and I think from my perspective, and we can't solve these things overnight and one thing, but we could move one step at a time and show some movement. We've been discussing especially these 4 streets for quite some time, and I would just like to make a suggestion or even a motion that we you declare these 4 streets public streets, and that's as far as we go for now. That at least gives us, one step forward, and then we decide what to do. That doesn't say we're going to do anything else, but we can at least offer a solution, to where do we go from there. But at least it's, we can stop disagreeing about that, because we don't have any, the evidence we have, in my opinion, supports that they're public streets, and we don't have any evidence, hard evidence to say they're private streets, other than a description that doesn't necessarily apply.
Well, all y'all on the council have seen, I've put out a couple of times, hopefully just to put a proposal out to come up with the start of conversation, to come up with a resolution to this difficult problem. And the way I'm approaching this is not to try to solve any one street or group of streets other than the streets that are declared private, that most of them are don't have top coat because the economic crisis that we've just been through and the developers have gone. I think all the streets were designed and planned to go into as public streets eventually. I think that's something we should start to work towards, is to get them there. And I have put out a plan that I think will, it's just something to start with. I'm open to suggestions as to how to alter it. But the all or nothing type of situation is not good. All it's going to do is cause hardships as well as teeth grinding between the city and possibly many of our citizens. Now, I'm going to take your time again to go over this, is that there were 93 visited. We paid $30,000 for this report, approximately. 93 streets were visited. The estimated cost, 32 streets of the 93 streets have no homes. That's 34%. None of them have homes, which means that sometime later they will be top-coated when the builders come in to take over and finish the streets out. 10 streets are considered by the city as private streets, so that's 10%. There are 3 alleys in there, which I'm not paying any attention to the alleys at present. Present study estimates there's $341,000 to repair the 10 streets plus 3 alleys, which I just said I wasn't, but I did. I've also looked at each street and estimated the cost that included $50,000 of mobilization. If you divide the 232 homes, there's a total of 232 homes that are occupied or should be occupied, and a cost of $1,036,000. You can cut that cost in half to a total cost. If you divide that $1 million by 232, comes out to be $518 per home. Now, to go and get involved in any type of court action, it's going to be a lose-lose for both parties. The people who are bringing the suits, they're going to have to pay for attorneys. If we have to go to court, this city is going to be divided. Our citizens are going to be upset. They're already upset. You heard it tonight. It's just not worth it. Several years ago, the city forgave $150,000 to one developer and an impact fee to build one building, a fine building, 151 Main Street. One developer versus 232 families. We have an opportunity to look good, to jump in and help citizens from a financial disaster. Disaster can come in many ways: water, wind, sickness. We just happened to experience one that came in a financial disaster. And we've already designated, we know which ones they are. We can bring these streets, we can top coat them. They won't be perfect streets, but they will be top coated. And then we can bring them into the city and start maintaining them as far as sweeping them, so forth. Already, the question came up about using city monies, taxpayers' monies, to
put on private streets. Well, of course, these people are taxpayers. But I bring up the point, we're getting ready to start resurfacing Main Street. Guess whose money we're gonna use? Georgia taxpayers. Yes, we're Georgia taxpayers, but it's gonna be taxpayers from all over the state. So precedence is set. I just think that at some time we can work out that, I know Mr. Cummins hate for me to bring this up, but we can use SPLOST money. We don't have to use it right now. The monies are gonna come in. We're gonna get $17 million collected over the period of SPLOST 6. And how many dollars are designated for streets, Mr. Cummins, do you recall?
I don't have the exact number on my
Well, I was thinking in the neighborhood of 4 million. 6? We're gonna have $6 million. We're already, what, 2 years into SPLOST 6? Or close to it?
Yes. Yeah, well, you got about 4 to go.
4 to go? So in the next 4 years, we're gonna collect a sizable amount of money that we can take and share with these citizens. It's not the perfect solution, but it is an attempt to come up with a solution, and I'm not trying to solve just Wooded Mountain Trail. And I hope the people from Wooded Mountain Trail understand that I'm in here trying to solve a problem for the city of 243 homeowners. So I would like for this to be considered by this council, or recommend something else, alter this around any way we want, but to use this as a format to try to resolve this problem of private streets. And then we bring the streets in at a later date.
I believe we had a motion here, didn't we? You made a motion?
I don't know if it was ever seconded. I think it was a recommended, was it second?
I have a motion. by Mr.
He had a
Grant,
motion.
but no second.
Is there a second to his motion?
Yeah, no second, do we left me hanging? Oh, no.
No second?
I don't know, what was the motion?
State your
Declare
motion
them
again.
public streets.
Motion to declare those 4 streets in Great Scott public streets.
Okay, we have a
You
motion. We
didn't-
have a
you didn't
second.
get a
I'll
second.
second it just a second.
Okay, so we can continue discussion. Mr. Rusty, you had something now?
Yeah, I think, Hooky, one thing we gotta be a little bit careful of is the cart goes a little bit before the horse here, because we can't go in to a private street and top coat it and then bring it into the city. The horse has to go first. We have to bring it into the city and then we'll top coat it.
Right.
But I don't necessarily, I'm not opposed to that. I think you gotta remember one thing, is we're setting a precedent. There's a lot of streets, there's a lot of people that have been through that. We're all living in the same economic environment. Everybody got hit. There's a lot of people that have been impacted, and that's not a very valid argument. What I say we have to look at is this a private or is this a public street? If it is private and we still wanna take it in, we can take it in and then code it. But we gotta have an agreement on the people that front that street that they wanna turn it over to us.
I appreciate that, but let me,
Hold on a minute. I've got to shift around here. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, if we declared public streets, we also have to go to the master plan of Great Sky. And I'm gonna read from the master plan the definition of a street. And then you can decide whether or not curbs and sidewalks and all of that are included. One-sided streets will be used when the topographic conditions dictate that lots on the downhill side of the street are feasible, but lots on the uphill side would result in undue grading and destruction of existing tree cover. Rights-of-way will be 30 feet wide and streets will be 18 feet wide. Streets typically will not have curb and gutter. The design intent is to give the appearance of a mountain lane. Keeping the cross-section of the street narrow will avoid excessive cutting and filling with the subsequent loss of tree cover. Drainage swales and occasional collection points will handle the stormwater in these areas. Front yard building lines will be a minimum of 10 feet from the right-of-way. Mountain lane, wooded mountain trail, this describes it. Whether it's a public or private street, it was never any intent to put sidewalks.
what do you read
curbs.
This is out of the master plan of Gray Sky.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know, and you could go on and, again, everybody's correct. You're correct, Mr. Mayor. There is no definition that says wooded mountain trail, and what street is it? Morning, River Birch, Morning, and there's another one, Morning Breeze, or, there's 4 streets, I don't have them in the top of my head. There's nothing that says those 4 streets are private streets. There's nobody arguing that specifically designates those streets as private streets. And I think the designation was originally said by the developer, but we don't have any proof of it. And all we have is the description within the master plan. Let me make one more statement. What I would suggest we do is that we ask our city manager to basically take a look at those streets, do the calculations as was done for the other streets within the subdivision and others, and you know, it would come back with $1 per lot and all that, the same as we did for the other subdivisions.
But there's no
Mr.
undeveloped
Mayor,
lot.
we actually had that number within the Stantuck study.
Oh, okay. That's what I've done.
Was that the $500 and some dollars?
Yeah.
Per building lot?
You split it in half.
Who's paying the other half?
We are.
Oh,
Out of spots.
so.
Well, what if you didn't split it in half?
And if you didn't split it in half, it was $1,036,000.
Now,
I don't know, it's not
Yeah, no, if you did all the streets,
you're doing all the private streets.
all the private streets.
Yeah, he's doing all the private.
See, y'all are not hearing me, not at all.
I've heard it.
Right?
We got it all.
And very much different with what you had to say, Mr. Russ, is that it's very valid points are in here, and it's substantiated with numbers. I forget. But the mayor interrupted me when I was about ready to talk, and I tried to grab it, but I tried to do that.
Oh.
But
I got it.
y'all are standing behind what's written in the pages of ordinances and things of this nature.
That's all we got to do.
We're here to manage a city, Mr. Mayor. And if we can find a way to help these citizens with your help and support, that's what we're here to do.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Well,
I'm trying to do it in a way that makes sense. We need to agree that those streets should be treated as any other street within that subdivision. That's all I'm saying. And once we say that, then your process goes into place. But we can't do anything that, on the street that anybody says is private, we're gonna say it's private, and then go and do something, then say it's public.
Well, let me put it this way, the 4 streets that are in Great Sky, you're not gonna have any problem getting an okay to come in there and code them. There's nobody gonna say, don't do it.
No, I don't think, but we wouldn't get any problem with people going and, doing somebody else's private street, if it were a private street.
No, but the difference in here is that, and this is more, John, what I was talking about, is that these areas that y'all designated, or the city designated, you want to stand tech to look at, that's the ones that are in subdivisions. That is where the developer has pulled out, left them high and dry. There are other streets that are not coded, but there's not a developer. It might have been a single house building. This is a subdivision where they came in there and built it, and they sold them homes. Sold them homes with the idea, with the assumption that they were gonna have their streets top coated.
And the city failed.
I don't think the city failed.
The city failed them by not having the bonds to make sure that it was done.
Our city manager is gonna drive home and drive down a street that's unfinished.
But
And I feel sorry for
again,
him, we gotta go in.
it's not a private street,
But
because
we
they have to
gotta
pay the main
take
part.
up a collection and do that one.
I understand where you come from, Mr. Huffman, but let me throw something out. So I've got a street, and we decided we're gonna split 50, let's say it was feasible and practical and could do it. We're gonna split it 50-50 with the homeowners. And when you got 25 homeowners on that street, and 13 of them say yes, and 12 say no, they're not gonna split it. How are you gonna handle that?
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take a bet that I'll get them.
All 232?
Yeah.
Are we talking about homeowners that's already there, or are we
Yes.
talking about the
Homeowners,
ones like we're doing everybody else?
232 homes that people are living in today.
Well, we're not doing that in River Green, we're not doing that in Prominence Point, or
I'm taking that, I went through this list. 11 of those streets on that list don't have one home on them. I pulled them out. There are 11 streets on here that we got in this quote, or this estimate. They have 0 homes on them.
So you're talking about getting money from them, or?
No, that comes with the building later.
Okay, but you're talking about charging existing people there.
Where the homes
But we're
are.
not doing that in River Green, we're not doing that in any other subdivision.
I'm saying, if River Green is listed here, I did it. They're not listed.
But we're not doing that to bring the other streets up that weren't finished by the developers and for which there were no bonds. We're not charging the existing homeowners.
Well,
We're charging.
I take back, River Green is represented here, Ms. Cummings. Now, 100 and, no, that's Great Sky, I'm sorry. River Green only had,
Doesn't have any private streets.
Not anymore.
no,
Not anymore, but they followed the policy and brought the streets up to standard and.
That's right.
Acceptable.
No, they brought it up to an
Turn over there.
acceptable
Turn
standard.
over there, Cash.
but if we take the time to look at this thing a little different, and not just sit there and say, well, the ordinance says this, and we have a policy of that. Guys, if a windstorm went through there and knocked all the trees down on the houses, we're gonna sit back there and say, that's private property. We're not gonna do anything. I'm sorry.
Mr. Grant?
I don't disagree with Mr. Huffman's intention, so, and I just want to confirm my motion, because I know last month there was a motion considered to declare them private streets. My motion was to declare them public, but that would not, create any other obligations beyond that, is my understanding, correct?
Presently, that's true.
Presently.
But basically what you'd be
I'll
saying
say
is
it's
that
a
they're
good faith
considered
effort on our part to move this
Any
one
other
step
street.
forward.
Well, what about all the other streets?
Go ahead.
May Bill, the state basically says we don't have an obligation to maintain a street, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Dart, that there's no implied time frame to maintain a street, and the only time that we're required to do anything to that street is should it become impassable, isn't that correct?
That is correct. That's assuming the city has accepted it for maintenance at all.
That's right. Assuming that it's accepted for maintenance, there's not, even if you, by you're making them a public street, you're in essence accepting them for maintenance, but there's no obligation placed on the city relative to maintaining those streets at any particular time, whether next week or 2 years or 10 years. The only requirement we have legally is if it becomes impassable, then we must do something about it. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Dart?
Yeah, but I mean, I think you need to be very clear about what you're doing, because there's lots of public streets out there that we haven't accepted for maintenance yet.
Yeah, that's right.
So, well, so
Yes.
declaring it public doesn't necessarily mean you're taking it for maintenance, but if that's what you intend, you need to be very
You
clear about that.
intend to eventually
Well,
do that.
you need to know what you're doing when you make that motion. So-
Mr. Huffman, the difference, at least from my perspective and understanding, between these 4 streets and all those other streets on that list is the fact that there is conclusive evidence that those other streets are indeed private. And there's not that evidence on these 4 streets. That's the difference to me.
I agree.
And so, my question is, should we not then say that these 4 streets, due to the lack of that evidence there, and the fact there's a set of plans out there signed by the city, that do not designate them any differently than any other street within Great Sky, shouldn't we just say, okay, we're not saying they're private, we're saying they're just like every other street within Great Sky. And then, when we need to do something, we have the opportunity to do it.
So we're using the, let me see if I understand that right. I think it's shell game, but that's okay. You're saying because it's not clear on the plot that has that one street, that we're gonna take the assumption that it would be the same as all the other streets in Great Sky.
As far as being, any liability or any, requirements of the city to do anything in the future.
You know what that means? It means you're also gonna have to finish the parkway.
We're not anyway? Are you saying we're not anyway?
Not down there.
The parkway was already been accepted, I believe.
No, to a certain point, and
Halfway.
halfway.
Just halfway. Well, do you think the city is not going to do that?
I don't know.
I mean, how's it ever gonna get fixed?
I'll tell you what, the city didn't do the first part.
Well,
I hope not.
there's a program.
But the developer's gone.
We already have a program in
I know
place
that.
to finish.
So it's up to the city.
We
Well,
already
that's what
have
I'm
a
telling you,
program in
yes.
place to finish those streets. We've already voted, an add-on permit fee which generates some money as escrow by subdivision, which will finish those streets. So really, the only question that we have.
And the parkway.
And the parkway.
The parkway's gonna cost twice what the streets did.
Well, it's included in there in terms of the total unfinished pavement. Now, the only question
No, it's
you
not included.
have.
It's not included in there.
It's one big number for Great Sky, if you'll notice.
Yeah, but it doesn't break down where, I don't believe the parkway's in there.
It is, it's in that one bit large number for Great Sky. But anyway, the only question you have is are those 4 streets, do you want to declare them public
They put a number.
or private? And that's the bottom
There's no
line.
number there for the
Well,
parkway.
Parkway, there isn't, you're right, but
But
it's included in the total number for Great Sky.
So you're gonna do it all for $48,000?
No, it isn't $48,000.
446.
Well, that sounds more like it. That sounds more like it.
446.
Okay. I mean, I think we need to do something. I mean, we've hashed this out pretty much.
I'd like to get it off the shelf so they don't come back and attack us again.
Well, I'll let you go and see, they come up there and,
But if I was over hidden, whatever the name of that place is, I would be next in the line.
Getting what? Canton Heights?
What's?
Wooded Mountain Trail.
No. It's over here.
I think we have to
Well,
separate.
Town Mill, I'd be all over you from Town Mill.
Yeah, but I think we gotta separate this out. The developer, in this case, made it difficult for us because the city accepted it without designating these private, they look like a duck, they quack like a duck, they walk like a duck. We wanna call them a duck, but in fact, we've called them
That's the
public
thing, theory
street.
I don't agree with.
But the 4 streets alone, let's just take the 4 streets as the only issue, forget all the rest, we're talking about
That is the
4
issue.
streets. No, Hookie wants to bring 230 some homes in, there aren't that many on those 4 streets. We're just
No,
talking,
it's not.
we're
Go
only
ahead.
talking about the 4 streets. The Stan Tech study, which we adopted, called them private streets, we're gonna have to change that, we'll just pull these out, call them public streets, and then, do we have to go to the residents and ask them to agree to allow us to take them in, we just take them in?
you do that.
Well, what would be the difference? We're gonna put them on a schedule to maintain them, that's it. So they become public streets, no big deal. What's the difference?
True mayor's correct, actually.
So we're gonna go in and finish all those Great Sky streets.
No,
Eventually,
Hookie.
we're gonna have to.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going in there tomorrow, I assure you.
But we're only talking about
Eventually
4
we will.
streets right now, those 4
No,
streets.
you're not.
Sandy, you had a comment.
Talking about the parkway. Hold on.
Sorry, I can't talk well. Mr. Grant has a motion on the floor to, make the 4 streets public streets, and the city would maintain them. I would request to amend that motion to, divide out those streets individually, because if it remains all 4 streets in the same motion, I have to abstain.
Right.
But I can vote on them individually.
You could
and
vote on
not
3.
my street.
And I would like to include, if we have to, the 5 streets, because we gotta put the parkway in.
No, the Parkway's in the plan
Parkway
already.
is, there's no question about the Parkway being,
Then that will be the only street not coded.
No, it will be, it's included in the entire package in Great Sky.
We've addressed all the other streets.
Okay, let's
We're
get back,
talking about the
let's get
four.
back here. Mr. Grant, will you accept the change to your motion there?
Yes.
Well, you just have to make a separate motion for each street,
Yeah,
so
have
we
to
really
have a
need to
separate
start
motion.
over.
Okay, you wanna make a motion for which one or first?
What's your street?
I'm not sure, all 4 of Wooded Mountain?
Draw your street.
River, Birch, Court.
And so we're gonna vote on 3 and then what?
We vote on 4 streets separately, but I will abstain from voting on Birch.
Could we just vote for 3?
We could do it 3.
Three
We could do
and
the
then
3 streets.
Let's just do yours
We have the
first.
same vote. Don't worry about it.
Well, I'd rather do the other first.
Sandy's first?
Let's do the 3 first.
Oh,
Let's do the 3 first.
Okay, so we have Wood Mountain Trail, or the other
We're
2,
setting a record here on time.
Woody Mountain Trail what?
or the other 2 other than River.
What's the other 2 streets?
River,
Mountain Breeze.
Mountain Laurel
Mount Laurel Walk.
Mountain Laurel Walk, River Birch Court, Morning Breeze Lane, Wooded Mountain Trail.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Bill?
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that we declare Wooded Mountain Trail, Mountain Laurel Walk, and Morning Breeze Lane public streets.
Okay, so we have a second.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All
Can
right.
can we discuss now? Can we have?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Could we make it conditional upon those 2 guys coming back and apologizing if we? I mean, come on, give me a break. Okay, that's all my.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion with the exception of 1 abstention.
No, she didn't abstain
Oh,
from
you
that
didn't
one.
abstain on that one, okay, okay. Now,
Would you like to make a motion
Oh, this.
next motion.
that we declare River Birch Court a public street?
Okay. We have a second. Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
I abstain.
1 abstain. Okay, all members with the exception of, Ms. McGrew.
May I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Other than the one I just asked?
Oh, is there one question here?
What does public street mean to us now that we've voted these 4 streets?
I know what it means. It means to me that it is exactly the same as all the other streets within Gray Sky. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I mean, you know, I
Because
think
there's some unfinished streets there.
There are 2 choices, public or private.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so they just be being, I
Okay.
mean, they got what they wanted.
Public streets.
No, they don't have what they wanted yet.
No.
One
It's a
step
step
in
in
the
the
right
right
direction.
direction.
It's a good.
Okay, next item. Discussion of security measures in response to House Bill 60. There's really any kind of assumption that we need to make on that. It's pretty clear that according to the definition within the law, this building is a courthouse by definition, and beginning with our first council meeting in the new council chambers downstairs, that's also the municipal courtroom. So we will have certain security measures similar to that which is in existence now for our council meetings as well there. Mr. Cummings? Yeah.
Having designated, I think it is a building that houses a courthouse, so according to the law, you would not be permitted to carry a weapon into this building and comply with it.
When we are not in session as a council and the city, the front door is open for payment, let me finish. And for payment of fines, are we gonna check, are we gonna have a security guard at the door checking?
Well, I think we need to ask our city manager to look into that because, here's the thing. if we, are we gonna leave the entire building open when the court is not in session? The answer to that, I hope, is no. I think that, we could very well have one setup. I mean, this might be just one crazy alternative, but, if even on the court days, which is what, once a week, they come in the front door of the city hall and go around into the courtroom from that way, they can exit out of the back of the courtroom. I mean, and that's the way you would only have to have one security metal detector and so forth.
This is for the court dates, though.
Well, no, it would be there all the
Yeah,
time.
but sometimes people don't pay their fines immediately after the court, right?
Sure.
They sometimes do or don't, they always pay them immediately.
No, I don't think they do. I don't think.
So they can come in at
Well, they
another.
could pay anytime.
Are you trying to say that they'd have to come in through the chamber to go pay the fine?
No, I'm saying they would come through the front door of the city hall and they would go through a metal detector perhaps.
Oh, okay.
And.
Well, what happens?
Just like anyone else.
Here's the problem though, when we have a metal detector and this alarm goes off, who checks?
You don't have to have two people there.
Yeah.
One of them needs to be certified, I'm sure.
Yes.
This is what we're gonna have all the time?
No, that's something I think you charged me to figure
I
out.
don't even look at it. I have no idea whether that process would even work, so don't give me, don't say, I'm saying that's the way to do it. I'm just
He's
saying that's a
charging me
possibility.
to
Okay.
come up with the options of doing it and what it would cost to do.
Right.
Oh, we gotta have it in place by July 1.
Right. Okay, next item, discussion of waste removal contract options.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just asking here for the council to direct us as to, A, do we do RFPs for the waste removal, which would begin with October 1st? That's the first question I'd like you to direct us in. Are we gonna do an RFP process? And the second direction is that we came up with two options, which is to maintain the service as we currently are performing it. And the second option was to do direct billing from whatever waste collection company we did contract with. So I'm just asking you for direction.
That would be an alternate to the same.
That's
bid.
correct, it would be the alternate in the RFP.
Mr. Grant?
I mean, I agree with, as we discussed last week, that none of us have any issue with waste management. They've done a great job and the service has been great. However, I think we have an obligation on a contract of that size to do an RFP, and I think that's the process that the council, previous councils have agreed to, and I don't think that is penalizing, waste management in any way, and hopefully they'll keep the contract, and it doesn't cost us anything to bid it out, and I think it's due diligence, and so my advice would be, or my suggestion would be to do the RFP and do the RFP for both ways, for all companies.
Is that a motion?
Yes, it can be.
Do I have a second?
Yes.
Second. Okay. Any other discussion or questions?
Yeah, as far as the billing it out, that possibly could raise the price. And the reason it does is that the city has some leverage for people paying their bills, where waste management doesn't. If they don't pay their bill, they could get their water cut off, because it all goes on the same bill. Where waste management, if they don't pay their bill, they probably still may get their trash picked up. And then waste management has to start recapturing the people who don't pay their bill. They have to offset those losses, and the people who pay for those losses are the good citizens that do pay. So history has shown that can be a more costly method of billing. So I kind of like the idea of let's keep it right there. I'd like to mention that as far as service, it is a service, so we can do an RFP or we can select whoever we want. And I would like to
say that there have been times, and it happens in this state, and I'd like to warn people, that there are smaller companies that would love to have this piece of business. And they get in and they don't do what they say they do, or if they do it and don't make money, they exercise their 30-day notice and they leave. That is, that has happened in this state, and those situations do exist. So I think we should take that into consideration. The things that that Waste Management does for this city that probably won't show on a RFP is, you know, we had the recycle day out here this past weekend, and they were here for what, 9 to 2 or something like that, and did a fantastic job of taking care of disposing of stuff that we as a city don't want to mess with. They are very active in the civic things. In fact, our representative, Vic Knight, is in the Cherokee Leadership Plan. He's in that. He's chair of the Going Green Committee along with Camille downstairs, as a member of the Leadership Cherokee. He does the Graphic Arts Festival, collecting that. These are things that are value-added type of situations that I don't think we're going to have that with going outside. So, and then we got the new thing, the big thing is the recycle bank. Other organizations don't have recycle banks, or if they do, it's kind of small and not doing a whole lot. But that recycle bank is big, and it's growing, and people are joining it every week. And if we're not participating, we should, sir. But anyhow, I just wanted to mention those things. I think as far as an individual, Vic is the best PR guy we got on our staff. I'm telling you, when you have a problem, you call Vic, and he will take care of it, and the citizens absolutely will. And that's the best PR we can have. We can't buy that type of PR.
Okay. All right, Mr. Cummings?
One last thing, and I think it's the consensus of what I've just seen, that we ought to do an RFP. And everything you said, I totally concur with. And those are all arguments when we get the results of the RFP.
Sure.
We can say and move forward, here's why we should select them versus maybe another who doesn't have the same level of history or whatever.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You want to say something else?
No, yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. I agree with the motion that we should go out and bid it two ways, either build direct or the same way we're doing it now. And I agree with everything he says about waste management. It's it's hard to find fault with them, but I think it's real important. Our duty is to find the best price, and that doesn't mean we're gonna throw waste management out if they're close or whatever.
Right.
But I think if the bids come in and they're from companies that aren't of the same quality of waste management, I don't know if there is another one out there, maybe we go out and solicit even some bids, because one of the bad things about I'm not saying we're in bed with waste management, but they've been doing this for a while. People don't really feel they've got a fair shot at it, so they don't bid it. So we might have to go out and really solicit bids if we get small waste management companies, not like the waste.
You'll get some bids on it.
Okay.
If we got happy citizens, go out and go out and get the best price. I just surely hope this council is not looking for just best price. Yes, a couple of years ago, when it did go out, they saved $70,000. That's not going to happen again. So we shouldn't have expectations of another $70,000 coming off. That's not it. Another option, though, is we can. Well, you won't. But another option would be is to continue on the policy. On the contract that we have, that option for a year. We can do that if we so desire.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. All members voting for the motion with the exception of Mr. Hutton. Voted no. Okay. Next item, recommendation of bond council.
Yeah, we did an RFP, as you know, they all came in, with cost, not to exceed $40,000 for helping us refinance the Series 2009. The CFO has recommended, Murray Barnes and Penister LLP, and the main reason for selecting them, since they were all, or recommending them since they were all the same in price, was that we've done work with them before, and their work has been at a satisfactory level. And so I'm making a motion that we,
Now, this is the attorney issues we're talking about.
these are the bond counsel for us refinancing the 2009.
Yes.
And that 40,000 includes internal and external legal
Are
costs.
we gonna go out an RFP on that?
We
Already
did,
did.
already did.
The consultant we hired did that for us.
Yeah, and it's Murray, Barnes, and Fenister that I make a motion that we name as our bond counsel.
I'll second.
We have motion, say any other discussion?
And my understanding that we only pay that if we do
Exactly.
refinance.
Correct. Any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members vote for the motion.
That means for us.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Next item, we got
Susan.
bond council.
Time for the picture show again.
Yeah, Northwest Fire Station site and architectural selection.
I'll start it out. Laurel Canyon is, we're in charge with constructing a fire station in the Laurel Canyon area. And we're charged with finding a site and architect, and I will go into, with the architect portion, we are looking at, I wish I could read my notes, but anyway, let me get some light here. A little. How much light do you want? Not that much. Not that much. We went out looking for a site, and that's the first thing I want to talk about is the site. We identified 4 possible sites, one of which is our currently owned site. And in going through that, the price of the sites have skyrocketed and what the people want for them. Our first choice site was $500,000 to start talking with them. I think they just figure the city has deep pockets and is gonna spend the money. So the approach that we're taking now is to take the dirt off of the current site. There's somewhere between an estimate, and we're working on getting estimates, between 300 and 400,000 to make that site suitable for building on, which is significantly less than buying a new site at $500,000 or more. The one site that we looked at had a steel frame building, that's $1 million, so we immediately ruled that out because it's just too expensive. There's approximately 54,000 cubic yards that have to be moved from the site, and we're gonna get some estimates on it. The second approach, and the reason you see a building up there, the second approach was rather than using an architect to design a building from scratch, we are going to use a pre-engineered concept where there's a company called Prime I believe it's Contractors, it could be Prime Construction. They have a state contract. They have state negotiated pricing that has, that we go in, they do actually from our conception all the way through turnkey. They'll even give us a price for grading, doesn't cost us anything to get it. There is no bidding required, and they'll do everything, like I said, all the way up through a turnkey operation. You can get on the next slide, I'll give you another example. I'm just trying to give you examples of buildings that have been constructed, not necessarily what we're looking at. The structure and the fascia, the outside fascia, or not fascia, the outside sides can be brick, stone, anything you want. The building does have certain size requirements. Sometimes we may have specified with an architect 40 feet, and this construction company comes back and says 42 is more, or 42 feet wide is more feasible because that's the way we built the inside structure. The estimated cost of the building that we're looking at is around $75 a square foot. We're looking probably at around a total of somewhere between $500,000 and $550,000 when we're done. Our total budget is around $950,000. The time frame, and I'll work it backwards, is to have and you can go on, and the next one will show you a sample interior layout that, you know, this of course will be changed, and it's just an example of how we do the interior. The time frame is to have it fully operational by July 1st. That would mean that we have to, if we use a pre-engineered construction, we would start construction March 1st. We would start grading the end of 2014 because of the significant amount of grading. It could take, depending on the size of the grading contractor, it could take up to 3 months to get in the weather and everything to get the site ready. So the idea of the mayor had suggested that we put the shovel in the ground by November. That's what we're aiming for, is to begin the process in November. We're looking at, as I said, I think I already said, is looking at grading contractors to tell how much that'll be doing. Will cost us to try and get a rough idea, or an RFP will probably go out to get bids and or proposals and bring it back to us for discussion. We're going to discuss with Prime the building of the building. They'll give us an idea of what it's going to cost, and we should start hiring people around March, or firemen around March 1st of 2015, and we've computed that we will need at the staffing station 9 additional firefighters. And that's just an update at this point. We still have a lot of details to work out, but the intent is to hopefully put the shovel in the ground November 1st.
How many sites did you actually take a look at in the
Ken,
original
if you're
area?
still there, can you tell somebody originally we started with?
We originally started out at 6 sites, narrowed it down to 4 sites. Those 4 sites, we approached them in regards to pricing and that sort of thing. And of those 4 sites, one of them was the existing site the city already owns. The other 3 sites were $500,000.
What acreage were you asking for?
One of the sites reflected 3.25 acres, and that property owner indicated that it was really closer to 5 acres, but they wanted $500,000. There was another site that was approximately 10 acres, and they were asking $500,000. There was a site that was about 2.7 acres that had the existing metal building on State Route 140, and they were wanting $1.2 million.
Well, I guess my question is, we did not utilize any broker or real estate company or anything to see if they had anything listed, or you know, when you get into that board of realtors and so forth, you know, they'll really do a lot of the legwork for you if you tell them what you want, and then you know, I just find $500,000 for, I don't think you need 3 acres for a fire station, do you? 3 acres?
No, that has sort of been what...
Look what Ridge Pine, I know it's got a little bit more than, I don't know if it's got that much or not, but they certainly don't use any more than a couple acres, I wouldn't think. But
the existing site at Laurel Canyon is less than 3 acres. I think it's 2.7.
it's not so much a question of what we need, it's a question of the size of the piece of property that's.
Well, no,
it
no,
could be.
well, I don't disagree with you on that, but I do think that if you give a description to some of the realtors out there, you may well, they'll be out there scratching for you. And come back and, you know, it may not do any good at all, but you tell them where you want something in a reasonable geographical area. And let them do some searching. I mean, they got an incentive, big time incentive to find something, you know. I just find that, you know, up the 140 corridor and up through that way within a reasonable area, you know, I would think you ought to get something for less than $500,000 to build a fire station on.
And that's why we're back to the original Laurel Canyon property and moving forward on that one, Mr. Mayor, is because every piece of property and owner that we approached in within the defined area and along the 140 corridor started out at $500,000.
Well, that's when, you know, when you got a broker involved, that sucker's gonna be trying to, you know. I apologize for that.
But the point is that the minute they heard we're gonna build a fire station, I agree with you, the property isn't worth $500,000. But the minute they hear we're coming in, the price goes up.
Right.
And you've said, in all respect, you've set a very aggressive time frame that you want us to do something. And we're looking at keeping the cost at the absolute lowest. Our cost is gonna be estimated for a site that we already own between $300,000 and $400,000. And when everybody else is telling me $500,000, and even if we can find a broker that can knock $100,000 out, we're gonna have grading work to do on that site. The other thing that, which hasn't taken into consideration, a lot of these sites are in the county, they don't have water and sewer, we'd have to add water and sewer. We need to get easements to get water and sewer to them. It's just a complexity. Now, I have no problem going and looking at 100 sites. The question is, we're trying to hit a schedule that you set for us, putting the shovel in the ground November 1st, and doing it at the most economical cost, and we're finding nothing that comes close to us grading the current site to $300,000 to $400,000. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Are these sites already for sale, or are y'all just asking like the one?
There aren't very many for sale, but we
I
typically
think
don't
it's-
answer questions.
All right, what's the next item there?
New business.
It's yours, I believe, City Man, you don't have anything else, do you?
No.
I hope not. Council introduced item, Mr. Rush, you want to talk
I
about the
just-
procedure for the selection committee?
I just wanted to ask you a question, Gene, in terms of your being chairman of the selection committee, and how we are being asked to submit at least three candidate resumes a week from tomorrow. And what happens to those 3 selections once they go into the process?
As you know, what we agreed to do there was for each council member, now I guess with the exception of Mr. Cummins, to submit 3 names, first, second, third choice, after reviewing all of the resumes that we have received that are through the deadline, last deadline. And those, I thought it made sense for them to be, you know, each person to have an envelope from the clerk with the first, second, third choice blank there, and they fill it out, return it to her. And then the selection committee will collect those, potentially a list of 18 names. There won't be necessarily 18 different names, but there'll be 18 names. And then the selection committee at that point will take those and kind of spread them out and see, you know, I anticipate there being a considerable amount of duplication on some of them, you know, for sure. And so then the selection committee I think, will be charged with, we haven't really talked about it as a committee at this point, but my thoughts were that the selection committee takes those and then spreads them out, looks at the duplications, first, second, third choice, and then brings that down to, I'd say no fewer than 3 and no more than 4 probably, to go back to the full council in executive session to see if there is any concurrence on the final list that we should submit to, for a vote.
What do you mean to interview?
Well, yeah, once we get, well, I don't think we need to do the interviews yet until we get a final list.
Yeah, but we
That
get the
unofficial
final four.
list, yes.
Final four are gonna be interviewed by your committee or by all of us as a council?
Well, it would probably be through the committee, but it would also, every council member would be invited to participate.
The other issue, and we talked about this earlier, was that you would want the three choices to be anonymous. That we would hand the envelope to Susan would know who, obviously who we are, but the choices, when you lay them out, when you lay them out, you're not gonna know who's did
No,
what.
the committee's not gonna know
That's
who
what you,
wrote whose name
that's
that.
what you, that's what you want. That's what you.
I think it's ought to make sense, really. I mean, then it makes it
Well,
a little bit more, gives it a little independence.
I'm not questioning, I'm just trying to figure out what the process is.
That was my thoughts, that
Okay.
we just, you know, we open them up and they all look just alike on the little piece of paper there, you know? I got two.
Okay, that's all I had, Gene. Thank you.
Okay, and, you know, I mean, I think this process is obviously going to involve and bring in the full council to a much greater extent than before, okay? And I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you.
All right. On the mayor's board, I just wanted to remind everyone that Festival of the Arts is this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and it's going to be not in Brown Park this time, if you've noticed what's going on out there, but it's going to be on North Street, around the courthouse, and in Canton Park. Okay? So that's a big event and brings a lot of folks in. Also, I had a...
Gene, you're responsible for the weather.
I'll take care of that part.
Thank you.
Also, I wanted to mention that I received a card from Megan Griffin, our Main Street Director, to the mayor and council, thanking them for their efforts and support in making Fincher Atkins Park a reality, which the ribbon was cut yesterday, I guess it was. And it really looks nice. If you haven't really looked at it, take a look at it. It looks so much better than that old did with the fire, where the drugstore burned out. And so I'm really glad that the Main Street Board, Michael Buckner particularly, and Megan all involved. Of course, this was Bill's original thought on that whole, how to do something with it. So thank him as well for making this thing really happen. It looks good. The only other thing is indeed, as John mentioned, at our last council meeting, unless we have any call meeting or anything, but hope not, in this room here, beginning June the 5th, we will be in the new council chambers downstairs. So looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll have most of the bugs worked out of it by the time we all there. Okay. All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I think there was a second. All in favor? Thank you.